When a billionaire CEO discovered the mechanic who could destroy her empire, she made one terrible mistake. She knocked on his door. 10 years of lies. One handwritten note. A paralyzed father who would never walk again. This is the story of Nathan Keller, the single father who became the most dangerous man in America without firing a single shot. And Vivian Cross, the woman who thought she owned the truth until a garage in Ohio proved her entire life was built on blood. Stay until the end. Hit like. Comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights inside Nathan Keller's garage had been flickering for 3 weeks, but he hadn't found time to replace them. That was the thing about running a failing repair shop in a dying Ohio town. You fixed everyone else's problems while your own world fell apart, one burned-out bulb at a time. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday when the black Mercedes pulled up outside. Nathan was underneath a 2004 Chevy Silverado, knuckles bleeding from a stripped bolt that refused to cooperate when he heard the engine cut. Expensive engine. Too expensive for Ashton Ridge, where most people drove trucks held together by rust and prayer. He didn't move. Whoever it was could wait. Hello? A woman's voice. Sharp. Used to being answered immediately. Nathan wiped his hands on a rag that hadn't been cleaned since 2019 and rolled out from under the truck. His back cracked in 3 places. 32 years old and his body already felt 50. The woman standing in his garage doorway wore a coat that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. Dark hair pulled back tight. Heels that clicked against concrete like gunshots. We're closed, Nathan said. I'm not here for repairs. Then you're definitely in the wrong place. She stepped inside anyway, her eyes scanning the cramped space with the kind of clinical assessment Nathan recognized from building inspectors and bank auditors. People who showed up to measure how badly you were failing. You're Nathan Keller. It wasn't a question. Depends who's asking. Vivian Cross. She said it like he should recognize the name, like it should mean something. CEO of Crossline Motors. Nathan's hand tightened around the greasy rag. He knew exactly who she was. Get out, he said quietly. Mr. Keller. Get out. Vivian didn't move. I need to talk to you about the recall. Don't know anything about a recall. You wrote the engineering report 10 years ago. The one that warned about catastrophic engine failure in the CX-7 series. Her voice was controlled, but Nathan heard something underneath it. Something close to panic. 73 people are dead. The company is facing $18 billion in lawsuits, and your name is on the only document that predicted this exact scenario. Nathan turned back to the Silverado. That report got buried the day I submitted it, along with my career. So unless you're here to apologize for Daniel Mercer stealing my work and blacklisting me from every automotive firm in the Midwest, we've got nothing to discuss. Mercer's gone. That made Nathan pause. Gone where? Disappeared 3 days after the recall announcement, emptied his office, transferred funds to the Caymans, and vanished. Vivian's heels clicked closer. But before he left, he sent me something. A file with your name on it, repair orders, shipping manifests, payment records going back a decade. Nathan's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. The file says you've been repairing defective Crossline engines for 10 years, that you've been paid in cash, that you knew about the defects and said nothing. Vivian's voice dropped. It says you're complicit in 73 deaths. The wrench slipped from Nathan's hand and hit concrete with a clang that echoed through the garage. He turned slowly. Is that what you believe? Vivian met his eyes. I don't know what to believe anymore. 6 weeks ago, I thought I was running a legitimate company built by my grandfather. Now I'm finding out the entire executive board knew we were selling death traps and covered it up for profit. Her composure cracked slightly. So I drove 9 hours to ask you directly. Did you know people were dying? Of course I knew. Nathan's voice was flat. I wrote the damn report warning you. Mercer buried it because fixing the problem would have cost the company $300 million in redesigns and recalls. He told me to shut up or I'd never work in automotive engineering again. So you shut up? No. Nathan's hands clenched. I quit. Walked away from the company the same week my wife died. Came back here to raise my daughter away from people like Mercer who think profit margins matter more than human lives. Vivian's expression shifted slightly. Then why are there repair orders with your signature? Why do the manifests show monthly shipments to this address? Because Mercer didn't let me walk away clean. Nathan grabbed a folder from his desk and threw it at her feet. Repair orders scattered across the concrete. He showed up here 6 months after I quit. Said the company needed someone to quietly fix the engines that failed early. Engines still under warranty that customers returned. Said if I refused, he'd make sure child services knew I was raising a 6-year-old alone in a garage that barely passed code. Vivian stared at the papers. So you fixed them? I documented them. Nathan's voice was hard. Every single engine, every defect, every failure point, 10 years of evidence that your company kept selling cars they knew would kill people. He pointed at the filing cabinets lining the back wall. It's all there. Dates, VIN numbers, failure analysis, photographs. Everything Mercer thought he was hiding by keeping me quiet, I was recording. The garage went silent except for the flickering fluorescent lights. Vivian slowly bent down and picked up one of the repair orders. Her hands were shaking. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Nathan laughed bitterly. With what credibility? I'm a disgraced engineer working out of a garage in a town nobody's heard of. Mercer made sure every automotive publication ran stories about me stealing company designs. Made sure everyone knew I got fired for incompetence. He grabbed another folder. I tried. Called the NHTSA 4 times. Sent reports to consumer safety groups. Know what happened? Nothing. Because Daniel Mercer had enough money to make sure nobody listened to the crazy mechanic from Ohio. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Show me, she finally said. Why? Because if what you're saying is true, then I've been the public face of a company built on murder, and I need to know exactly how deep this goes before I decide whether to burn it all down. Nathan studied her, the expensive coat, the perfect posture, the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if you could afford next month's rent. You'll bury this, he said, just like Mercer did. Just like every executive who saw that report and decided profit was more important. Try me. Something in her voice made Nathan hesitate. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he'd been carrying this weight alone for 10 years, and he was so goddamn tired. He walked to the filing cabinets. This is everything from 2014, he said, pulling open the first drawer. The year after I submitted the report. The year Mercer started sending the trucks. Vivian set down her purse and took off her coat. They worked until 2 a.m. Nathan pulled files while Vivian cross-referenced them against her laptop, matching VIN numbers to accident reports, matching dates to warranty claims. Her perfect composure slowly crumbled as the scope of the cover-up became clear. This engine, she held up a photo. This was in the Portland accident, the one where the family of 4 burned alive when the fuel line ruptured. Nathan didn't look up. I repaired that exact failure point on 17 different engines that year. Told Mercer it was a systemic design flaw. He told me to fix them faster. Vivian's hand covered her mouth. The Columbus incident, the mother and her 2 children, electrical fire from faulty wiring near the fuel tank. I flagged it in the original report. Mercer said it was too expensive to recall. The Phoenix, brake failure, metal fatigue in the calipers. Nathan finally looked at her. I have documentation on 47 engines that failed the exact same way before that crash happened. Mercer knew. He always knew. Vivian stood abruptly and walked outside. Nathan heard her vomiting in the parking lot. He kept sorting files. When she came back inside, her makeup was ruined and her hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. I need copies of everything. Why? Because tomorrow morning I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and by tomorrow afternoon either Mercer is going to prison or I am. Nathan shook his head. You don't understand how this works. Mercer has lawyers, money, connections. He'll bury you the same way he buried me. Let him try. Vivian's eyes were hard. My grandfather built Crossline on innovation and integrity. Daniel Mercer turned it into a death machine. And I'm not going to let his legacy be 73 funerals. 73 that we know about, Nathan corrected quietly. There are probably more. Accidents that got ruled driver error. Mechanical failures that never got investigated properly. Vivian closed her eyes. How do you live with this? I don't. Nathan gestured around the garage. I exist. I fix trucks. I raise my daughter. I try not to think about the people I couldn't save because nobody would listen. I'm listening now. Too late for that to matter. Maybe. Vivian picked up another file. But it's not too late to make sure Mercer pays for what he did. They worked through the night. By dawn, Vivian's Mercedes was loaded with boxes of evidence. Her suit was wrinkled, her hair had come loose, and she looked nothing like the polished CEO who'd walked into his garage 8 hours earlier. I'll call you, she said. When I know more. Nathan nodded, but didn't believe her. Rich people always said they'd call. She drove away as the sun came up over Ashton Ridge, painting the dying town in shades of gold that made everything look almost hopeful. Nathan went inside to wake up Ellie for school. His daughter was 6 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and Nathan's stubborn chin. She sat at the kitchen table in the small apartment above the garage, eating cereal and swinging her legs. Who was that lady? Ellie asked. Nobody important. She had a fancy car. Lots of people have fancy cars. Not in Ashton Ridge. Ellie grinned. Tommy's mom says the fanciest car here is Mr. Peterson's truck, and it's only fancy because it has working AC. Nathan smiled despite himself. Tommy's mom is a smart lady. Is the lady coming back? I don't think so. But he was wrong. Vivian returned 3 days later. This time she didn't knock. Just walked straight into the garage where Nathan was replacing the transmission on a '98 Ford Ranger and set her laptop on his workbench. I need you to explain something, she said. Nathan didn't look up from the transmission. Little busy here. This repair order. She turned the laptop toward him. March 2016. Engine serial number CX7-449213. You documented a complete fuel system failure. But according to Crossline's records, that engine was never returned for warranty work. That's because it exploded on I-70 outside Indianapolis. Nathan wiped his hands. Killed a truck driver named Marcus Webb, 43 years old. Left behind a wife and 2 teenagers. How do you know that? Because I tracked them. Nathan pulled out another folder. Newspaper clippings, obituaries, accident reports. Every engine I repaired that later failed. Every person who died because Mercer decided their lives weren't worth the cost of a recall. Vivian stared at the folder. You've been documenting the deaths. Someone had to remember them. She sat down slowly on an overturned crate. The board meeting didn't go well. Shocking. They said Mercer's files were fabricated, that you were a disgruntled ex-employee trying to extort the company. They voted to offer you a settlement in exchange for your silence. Nathan laughed without humor. How much? $5 million. That's less than they spend on Super Bowl commercials. I know. Vivian met his eyes. I voted against it. That was stupid. Probably. She gestured at the laptop. But I've been going through every file you gave me, cross-referencing accident data, warranty claims, internal memos, and I found something. She pulled up a scanned document, handwritten notes on cross-line letterhead. This is from Daniel Mercer's personal files, a memo to the engineering department dated 2 weeks after you submitted your original report. She zoomed in on a specific line. He explicitly ordered the team to ignore your findings and proceed with production. He knew the engines were defective and he ordered them built anyway. Nathan studied the document. Where did you get this? Mercer's assistant. Turns out he's been sexually harassing her for 6 years and she's been keeping records. Vivian's smile was sharp. She was very cooperative once I offered her a legal team and a witness protection program. This proves Mercer knew. It proves Mercer gave the order, but it doesn't prove the board knew. Which means they can claim plausible deniability and throw Mercer under the bus while protecting the company. Nathan turned back to the transmission. Then you've got your scapegoat. Mercer takes the fall, you rebuild the company's reputation, everyone moves on. Except that's not justice. Justice doesn't exist. There's just money and power, and whoever has more of both. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Is that what you really believe? It's what 10 years of watching guilty people walk free has taught me. Then help me prove you wrong. Nathan looked at her, really looked at her. The CEO, who'd shown up in a designer coat 3 days ago, was gone. This woman had dark circles under her eyes and coffee stains on her blouse. Why do you care? he asked. You could walk away right now. Blame everything on Mercer. Keep your job. Keep your reputation. Because 73 people are dead. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. And my name is on the company that killed them. So either I fix this or I spend the rest of my life knowing I was the public face of murder. Nathan set down his tools. What do you need? They spent the next 2 weeks building a case. Vivian would arrive at the garage every evening after leaving her downtown Chicago office, trading her heels for sneakers and her corporate mask for something more human. She'd sit on overturned crates surrounded by filing cabinets, matching Nathan's decade of documentation against Crossline's internal records. Sometimes Ellie would come downstairs after finishing her homework, and Vivian would look up from spreadsheets to watch Nathan braid his daughter's hair before bed. The first time it happened, Vivian had stared like she'd never seen a parent actually parent before. What? Nathan had asked. Nothing. Vivian had gestured vaguely. My father hired people for that. For braiding hair? For raising children. Nathan had gone back to braiding while Ellie chattered about her day at school, and Vivian had returned to spreadsheets with something unreadable in her expression. The pattern continued. Vivian arriving with coffee and questions, Nathan pulling files and explaining technical failures, Ellie wandering through their work sessions, completely unimpressed by the billionaire CEO sitting on a crate in her father's garage. Is she your girlfriend? Ellie asked one night after Vivian left. No. Tommy says when grown-ups work late together, it means they're dating. Tommy needs to mind his business. That's what his mom says, too, Ellie grinned. But she also says Mr. Peterson is definitely dating the lady from the post office, even though they say they're just friends. Nathan pointed at the stairs. Bed. Can Vivian come to my soccer game Saturday? She's busy. You didn't ask. I don't need to ask. She runs a billion-dollar company. She doesn't have time for second-grade soccer games. But when Saturday came, Vivian showed up. She stood on the sideline in jeans and a Crossline Motors polo that she'd clearly grabbed from corporate inventory, looking completely out of place among the other parents in their worn Carhartt jackets and faded team shirts. Ellie scored 1 goal and spent the rest of the game chasing butterflies in the outfield. She's terrible at soccer, Vivian observed. Worst on the team, Nathan agreed proudly. Then why does she play? Because she likes running around with her friends. Not everything has to be about winning. Vivian watched Ellie trip over her own feet trying to kick the ball. That's not how I was raised. I know. After the game, Ellie dragged Vivian to the concession stand and explained in detail why blue raspberry slushies were scientifically superior to red ones. Vivian listened with the same intense focus she gave quarterly earnings reports. Nathan watched them and felt something uncomfortable shift in his chest. Later that night, after Ellie was asleep, Vivian sat in the garage going through files while Nathan replaced brake pads on a Dodge Dakota. I'm moving forward with federal charges, she said without looking up. Nathan's hand slipped and he scraped his knuckles raw against the rotor. Against who? Mercer. The board members who signed off on production. Anyone who knew about the defects and did nothing. That'll destroy the company. The company deserves to be destroyed. Nathan wrapped his bleeding knuckles in a shop rag. You'll lose everything. I know. Your job, your reputation, probably your freedom if Mercer's lawyers are good enough. I know that too. Then why? Because someone has to. Vivian finally looked up. You spent 10 years documenting the truth while everyone called you a liar. You raised your daughter alone in a falling-apart garage because you wouldn't compromise on what was right. And I spent 10 years in a glass tower pretending I didn't see the blood. She stood abruptly and walked to the filing cabinets, pressing her palms flat against the cold metal. I used to think power meant controlling the narrative, protecting the company, making sure stockholders stayed happy. Her voice was tight, but real power is what you did. Refusing to be silent even when silence would have been easier. Documenting the truth even when nobody wanted to hear it. That's not power, Nathan said quietly. That's just stubbornness. Maybe, Vivian turned around. But it's the kind of stubbornness that keeps 73 dead people from being forgotten. They worked in silence after that. The only sounds, the flickering fluorescent lights and the distant highway traffic passing through Ashton Ridge on their way to somewhere more important. At midnight, Vivian's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. "It's the company attorneys," she answered on speaker. "Ms. Cross, we need to discuss your recent activities." The lawyer's voice was professionally neutral. "We've received reports that you've been meeting with Nathan Keller. We strongly advise you to cease all contact immediately." "Why?" "Mr. Keller is considered a hostile witness in ongoing litigation. Any collaboration could be perceived as conspiracy to defraud the company." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Nathan Keller is the only person who's been telling the truth for the past 10 years. Ms. Cross, tell the board I'll be filing federal charges by the end of the week, against Daniel Mercer and anyone else who knew about the defects." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're making a serious mistake." "Then I'll make it on my own terms." She hung up. Nathan was staring at her. "They'll come after you now. Let them." "Vivian, I'm done pretending." Her voice was shaking, but firm. "I'm done protecting people who value money over human lives. And I'm done being afraid of doing the right thing just because it might cost me everything." The fluorescent lights flickered again. Nathan wiped his hands on the rag and walked over to his desk. He pulled out a folder he'd kept separate from all the others. "You should see this first." Inside was a photograph of a white envelope and a handwritten note on cross-line letterhead. Vivian read it twice. Then she sat down hard on the concrete floor. "This is Mercer's handwriting. I know. This is a direct order to remove defective engines from warranty records. I know that too. This is dated 3 days before the Chicago highway accident, the one where Robert Patterson was paralyzed from the neck down." Nathan's voice was flat. "Father of 2, former Marine. He'll never walk again because Daniel Mercer decided fixing a $50 wiring flaw wasn't worth the cost." Vivian's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the photo. "Where did you get this?" "My bookkeeper found it last week, tucked inside an old repair folder I'd forgotten about. Mercer must have accidentally included it in one of the shipments. This is evidence of criminal negligence, possibly manslaughter. It's proof Mercer knew exactly what he was doing." Nathan took the photo back carefully, and it connects directly to a victim with a name and a face and a family who can testify in court about what was taken from them. Vivian stood slowly, like she was moving through water. "We need to get this to the federal prosecutor immediately." "No." "Nathan, not yet." He returned the folder to his desk. "Because the minute we hand this over, Mercer will know we have it, and desperate men do desperate things." As if on cue, headlights swept across the garage. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Daniel Mercer climbed out. He looked exactly like Nathan remembered. Expensive suit, professional smile, the kind of man who could order someone's death and sleep soundly that night. "Nathan." Mercer's voice was warm, friendly, like they were old colleagues meeting for drinks. "It's been too long." Nathan stepped between Mercer and the garage entrance. "You need to leave." "I just want to talk." "We've got nothing to discuss." Mercer's eyes flicked to Vivian, who had gone very still beside the filing cabinets. "Hello, Vivian. Surprised to see you here." "I'm sure you are." "I'm disappointed, actually. I trained you better than this." Mercer's smile didn't waver. "Fraternizing with disgruntled ex-employees, making reckless accusations. This isn't like you." "You don't know me at all." "I know you're about to make a very serious mistake." Mercer pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Which is why I'm here with a solution that benefits everyone." He set the envelope on Nathan's workbench. $10 million. Cash. Completely untraceable. In exchange for every file in this garage and your written statement that you fabricated the evidence as part of a personal vendetta against Crossline Motors. Nathan didn't touch the envelope. "That's your offer?" "It's more than generous considering you have no legal standing and significant credibility issues." Mercer's professional warmth was starting to crack. "Take the money, Nathan. Raise your daughter somewhere nice. Start over. And the 73 people who died were tragic accidents." Mercer's voice hardened. "The kind of statistical inevitabilities that occur in any manufacturing process. You can't blame Crossline for the inherent risks of automotive engineering. I can blame you for ignoring every warning and building cars you knew would kill people." Mercer's mask dropped completely. "You self-righteous piece of—" He stopped, visibly controlling himself. "You think you're a hero? You're a failed engineer working in a garage that's one inspection away from being condemned. Your daughter eats mac and cheese 4 nights a week because you can barely afford groceries. You have nothing. I have something you don't, Nathan said quietly. A clear conscience. Mercer laughed. Conscience doesn't pay rent. Conscience doesn't put your kid through college. Conscience doesn't... Get out. Nathan, get out of my garage before I throw you out. For a long moment, Mercer just stood there. Then his expression shifted into something cold and calculating. You're making a mistake, both of you. He looked at Vivian. By the end of the week, you'll both be facing criminal charges for attempted fraud and extortion. I have lawyers who will bury you so deep you'll never see sunlight again. Try it, Vivian said. Mercer picked up his envelope and walked to the door, but he paused in the entrance, silhouetted against the parking lot lights. I made you, Nathan. After your wife died and you fell apart, I gave you a lifeline, a way to feed your daughter and keep a roof over her head. And this is how you repay me? Nathan's voice was very quiet. You didn't give me a lifeline, you gave me a muzzle, and you used my daughter as leverage to keep me quiet while people died. Then I guess we're done here. Mercer walked back to his SUV and drove away. The garage was silent except for the fluorescent lights and Vivian's unsteady breathing. He's going to come after us, she said. I know. He's going to use every dirty trick he has. I know that too. Vivian walked over to where Nathan was standing. Are you scared? Nathan thought about Ellie sleeping upstairs, about 10 years of carrying secrets, about 73 people who deserve someone to fight for them even if they weren't alive to see it. Terrified, he admitted, but I'm done running. Vivian nodded slowly. Then we fight. Together? Together. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over Ashton Ridge. The dying town looked almost beautiful in the early morning glow, full of potential it would probably never live up to. But inside the garage, with the flickering lights and the decade of evidence and the impossible fight ahead of them, Nathan and Vivian began planning how to bring down a man who thought he was untouchable. They had no idea if they'd win. They just knew they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't try. The attack started 48 hours after Mercer left the garage. First, it was the customers. Mrs. Chen called on Saturday morning to cancel her oil change appointment. She'd been bringing her Buick to Nathan for 6 years, never missed a scheduled service. I'm sorry, Nathan, she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. My son saw something online about you and some lawsuit with Crossline Motors. He thinks maybe it's not safe. It's fine, Mrs. Chen. I don't believe what they're saying, but really, it's fine. She hung up quickly, relieved not to have to explain further. By noon, 4 more cancellations came through. By Monday, Nathan's appointment book looked like a ghost town. Vivian found him in the garage that evening, staring at his empty calendar with the kind of blank expression that came from being too tired to be angry anymore. They got to your customers, she said. Local Facebook group. Someone posted an article calling me a fraud and a safety risk. Nathan tossed his phone onto the workbench. It's been shared 234 times. In a town of 3,000 people, that's basically everyone. Vivian pulled up the article on her laptop. The headline read, Disgraced Mechanic Attempts to Extort Automotive Giant. The byline belonged to a corporate PR firm Nathan recognized from Mercer's Rolodex. It's a hit piece, Vivian said. Completely fabricated quotes, no actual sources. My legal team can have this retracted by tomorrow. Doesn't matter. People already believe it. Then we'll... Vivian. Nathan's voice was flat. I've been through this before. 10 years ago, when Mercer blacklisted me from the industry, he used the exact same playbook, planted stories, destroyed my credibility, made sure nobody would hire me. He gestured at the empty garage. This is just round 2. Vivian closed her laptop slowly. I'm sorry. For what? For not believing you 10 years ago. For being part of the system that did this to you. Nathan shrugged. You were what, 20 years old? Probably still in business school. 22! And I was already being groomed to take over the company. She paused. Mercer used to tell me stories about disgruntled employees who tried to sabotage Crossline. He made it sound like protecting the company from people like you was noble, necessary. Maybe he believed that. He believed profit was the only thing that mattered. Vivian's hands clenched. And he taught me the same thing. Maximize shareholder value. Protect the brand. Never let emotions interfere with business decisions. So what changed? Vivian looked around the garage, at the filing cabinets full of evidence, the worn tools, the flickering lights Nathan still hadn't replaced. I met someone who chose truth over survival, she said quietly. And it made me realize I'd spent my entire life choosing wrong. Before Nathan could respond, footsteps echoed on the stairs from the apartment above. Ellie appeared in pajamas covered with cartoon astronauts, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Dad, I can't sleep." Nathan's expression immediately softened. "Bad dream?" "No, just thinking too loud." "About what?" Ellie climbed onto a stool near the workbench, swinging her legs. "Tommy's mom said you're in trouble. She told Tommy not to talk to me at recess." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Tommy's mom is wrong." "That's what I said. But then Sarah's mom picked Sarah up early from school, and Sarah said it's because her mom doesn't want her near me anymore." Ellie's voice got smaller. "Am I in trouble too?" "No, baby, you're not in trouble." "Then why is everyone being weird?" Nathan crouched down to Ellie's eye level. "Some people are saying things about me that aren't true, and it's making other people nervous, but it's going to be okay." "What are they saying?" "Grown-up stuff that doesn't matter." "If it doesn't matter, why are people being mean?" Nathan didn't have an answer for that. Vivian spoke up from across the garage. "They're being mean because your dad is trying to help people who got hurt, and some powerful people don't want him to do that." Ellie looked at her seriously. "Like superheroes?" "Sort of. But superheroes always win." "Not always," Vivian said. "Sometimes they fight really hard and still lose, but they fight anyway because it's the right thing to do." Ellie considered this. "Is my dad a superhero?" "Yeah," Vivian said. "I think he is." Nathan shot her a look that clearly said, "Don't put ideas in her head," but Ellie was already grinning. "Can I have a cape?" "Absolutely not," Nathan said. "Bed. Now." "But, bed." Ellie slid off the stool, dragging her rabbit toward the stairs. "Vivian, are you staying for breakfast tomorrow?" "I have to get back to Chicago early." "That's dumb. Dad makes really good pancakes on Tuesdays." "Ellie." "It's okay," Vivian said. "Maybe another time." After Ellie disappeared upstairs, the garage felt too quiet. "You're good with her," Vivian said. "I'm all she's got." "That's not what I meant." Vivian leaned against the workbench. "I meant you're patient, present. My father was never either of those things." "Is that why you work 80-hour weeks? Trying to prove something to him?" "He's dead. So I guess I'm just trying to prove it to myself now." She pulled up something on her laptop. "I went through Crossline's financial records from the past decade. Every quarter, Mercer authorized bonuses for the executive team based on cost-saving measures. Let me guess. Ignoring the recall saved costs. $340 million over 10 years, which generated bonuses totaling $78 million across 15 executives." Vivian turned the screen toward Nathan. "They all knew. Every single one of them profited from keeping those defective engines in production." Nathan studied the spreadsheet. Names he recognized from his brief time at Crossline's engineering division, people he'd worked alongside, people who'd smiled at him in meetings and then voted to bury his safety report. "This proves financial motive, Wustel," he said. "It proves conspiracy. If I can demonstrate that the entire executive board knowingly prioritized profit over safety, we can go after all of them under RICO statutes." "You're talking about dismantling the entire company leadership. I'm talking about justice." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You know what happens if you do this? Crossline stock will crash. Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Retirement funds will evaporate." "I know. People will blame you. Let them." "Vivian, those 73 people who died?" Her voice shook slightly. "They had families, jobs, futures. Robert Patterson was supposed to coach his daughter's softball team this spring. Marcus Webb was 3 months from paying off his house. They don't get second chances because my company valued profit margins over human lives." She closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "So yeah, thousands of people might lose their jobs. And that's horrible. But you know what's more horrible? Letting the people responsible walk away clean because we're afraid of collateral damage." Nathan had spent 10 years documenting deaths in silence. He'd never had someone else fight this angry on behalf of the victims. It was disorienting. "When's the federal prosecutor meeting?" he asked. "Thursday. I've already sent preliminary evidence. They're taking it seriously. Mercer won't let it get that far. What's he going to do? We have documentation. We have financial records. We have his handwritten note ordering evidence concealment. He's going to come after you personally, make you look unstable, compromised. He'll say you're having a breakdown, or that I manipulated you, or Nathan's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and went very still. What? Vivian asked. Nathan handed her the phone without a word. The email was from Child Protective Services. A complaint had been filed regarding Ellie's living conditions. An inspector would be visiting the property within 48 hours to assess whether the garage apartment met safety standards for housing a minor child. Vivian's face drained of color. He's using your daughter. Of course he is. It's the one thing he knows I can't fight. Nathan took the phone back, his hand steady despite the rage burning in his chest. He tried this before, 8 years ago when I first started documenting the engines. Inspector showed up, wrote a report citing code violations, threatened to remove Ellie if I didn't fix them within 30 days. What did you do? Spent every dollar I had bringing this place up to code. Worked 70-hour weeks for 2 months straight. Nathan laughed bitterly. Mercer knew I'd comply. He knew I'd do anything to keep my daughter. So he's counting on you to back down now. He's counting on me being the same desperate single father who had no options. Nathan met her eyes. But this time I'm not alone. Vivian straightened. What do you need? Time. If CPS shows up and finds violations, they can start removal proceedings immediately. I need this place spotless before Thursday. Then we make it spotless. Vivian called her assistant and cleared her schedule for the next 3 days. Then she showed up Tuesday morning wearing jeans, a cross-lined t-shirt, and work gloves that looked like they'd never been used. Nathan stared at her. You don't have to. Where do we start? They started with the apartment. Vivian scrubbed floors while Nathan patched holes in the drywall. She organized Ellie's chaotic bedroom while he replaced the cracked bathroom tiles. They worked in efficient silence, occasionally interrupted by Ellie asking questions or trying to help in ways that created more work. Why is Vivian cleaning our house? Ellie asked, watching Vivian attack the kitchen baseboards with industrial cleaner. Because she's nice, Nathan said. I thought rich people paid other people to clean. Where did you learn that? TV? Well, Vivian's different. Ellie studied Vivian thoughtfully. Is she going to be my new mom? Nathan nearly dropped the tile he was holding. What? No, we're just... Tommy said when ladies help dads with house stuff, it means they're dating. Tommy needs to stop watching his mom's reality shows. But when Nathan glanced at Vivian, she was smiling slightly while pretending to focus very hard on cleaning grout. By Wednesday evening, the apartment looked better than it had in years. New paint on the walls, working smoke detectors, a refrigerator that actually closed all the way. Vivian had even bought Ellie a new bed frame after discovering the old one was held together mostly by duct tape and hope. You didn't have to do that, Nathan said. The receipt says it's from a charity organization, completely legitimate. Vivian handed him the paperwork. If CPS asks, you applied for assistance 3 weeks ago and it just arrived. You're getting good at this. At what? Fighting dirty. Vivian's smile was sharp. Mercer taught me everything he knows. He just never considered I might use it against him. The CPS inspector arrived Thursday at 9 a.m. sharp. Her name was Patricia Gomez, and she had the exhausted efficiency of someone who'd seen too many bad situations to waste time on polite small talk. She went through every room with a clipboard and a measuring tape, checked the smoke detectors, tested the outlets, examined the water heater and the furnace and the structural integrity of the stairs. Nathan stood in the garage trying to look calm while Vivian pretended to work on her laptop at his desk. After 45 minutes, Patricia came back downstairs. Everything checks out, she said. Apartment meets minimum safety standards. I'll file my report this afternoon. Nathan exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Thank you. For the record, Patricia lowered her voice. I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know a bogus complaint when I see one. Someone wanted to rattle you. Did it work? She glanced at the freshly painted walls and new bed frame visible through the apartment door. Looks like you rattled them back. After Patricia left, Nathan sat down heavily on an overturned crate. One down, Vivian said. About 1,000 more to go. She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, Nathan's business insurance sent a cancellation notice. Apparently, his policy was being reviewed for fraudulent claims. That evening, the local bank called to inform him his line of credit was being suspended pending an investigation into unreported income. Friday morning brought a visit from the IRS. They wanted to audit his tax returns for the past 7 years. "This is harassment," Vivian said, reading through the audit notice. "Blatant, obvious harassment. It's Mercer tying up loose ends." Nathan was under a Honda Civic, replacing an oil pan. His voice echoed off the concrete. "He knows the federal prosecutor meeting is next week. He's trying to bury me in legal problems, so I look like a tax cheat and a fraud before I can testify." "We can fight this." "With what money?" "Legal defense costs thousands of dollars. IRS audits can drag on for years." Vivian was quiet. Nathan rolled out from under the Civic, wiping his hands. "You should distance yourself from me, publicly, before this destroys your credibility too." "No." "Vivian, I said no." She set down the audit notice. "Mercer wants us isolated. He wants you drowning in legal problems and me worried about my reputation. Classic divide and conquer." "So what do? We call his bluff." Vivian pulled out her phone. "I'm scheduling a press conference for Monday morning. I'm going to announce that Crossline Motors is cooperating fully with federal investigators, that we've uncovered evidence of systemic fraud within the executive team, and that you are a key witness whose documentation exposed the entire conspiracy." Nathan sat up. "That'll put a target on both our backs." "The target's already there. At least this way we control the narrative. Mercer will retaliate." "Probably. But he'll have to do it publicly now. And every attack he makes just proves we're telling the truth." Nathan studied her. The CEO who'd shown up at his garage 3 weeks ago in designer heels had been replaced by someone with grease under her fingernails and dark circles under her eyes, who talked about federal conspiracy charges like she was discussing quarterly earnings. "When did you get so ruthless?" he asked. "I've always been ruthless. I just used to aim it at the wrong targets." The press conference happened Monday at 10 a.m. in downtown Chicago. Vivian stood at a podium in front of 24 reporters while Nathan sat in the front row, uncomfortable in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. She didn't read from notes, just looked directly into the cameras and spoke. "3 weeks ago, I learned that Crossline Motors has been selling defective vehicles for over a decade. Vehicles that our own engineers warned us were dangerous. Vehicles that have killed at least 73 people and injured hundreds more." The reporters went silent. For 10 years, executives at this company, including former COO Daniel Mercer, deliberately concealed these defects to avoid the cost of recalls. They falsified safety reports. They intimidated whistleblowers. They prioritized profit over human lives. Vivian's voice didn't shake, didn't waver. "I am here today to announce that Crossline Motors is cooperating fully with federal investigators. We are providing all internal documents, financial records, and engineering reports related to these defects. And we are supporting the testimony of Nathan Keller." She gestured at Nathan, whose documentation over the past decade has been instrumental in exposing this conspiracy. "Mr. Keller attempted to warn Crossline about these defects 10 years ago. He was silenced, discredited, and blacklisted. And then he spent the next 10 years quietly building an evidence file that has now become the foundation of a federal criminal investigation." A reporter shouted a question. Vivian ignored it. "I know this announcement will damage Crossline's reputation and stock value. I know employees may lose their jobs. I know I may lose mine." She paused. "But 73 families have already lost someone they love because this company chose silence over safety, and I refuse to let that number grow." She stepped away from the podium without taking questions. The press conference exploded across every major news network within an hour. Crossline's stock dropped 18% before trading was halted. Nathan's phone buzzed non-stop with calls from reporters, lawyers, and people he hadn't spoken to in a decade, suddenly wanting to know his side of the story. He ignored all of them and drove back to Ashton Ridge. Vivian followed in her Mercedes. They met at the garage as the sun was setting, painting the town in shades of orange that made everything look temporarily beautiful. "That was stupid," Nathan said. "Probably. You just committed professional suicide on live television." "I know. The board's going to fire you before the week is out." "They already did. I got the email 20 minutes ago." Vivian pulled out her phone and showed him the termination notice. Effective immediately, escorted out by security. They're claiming I acted without board approval and damaged the company's interests. Nathan read the email twice. I'm sorry. Don't be. I should have done this 10 years ago. She sat down on the hood of her Mercedes, suddenly looking exhausted. Nathan sat beside her. They stared at the garage together, the flickering lights, the faded sign, the building that had been Nathan's entire world for the past decade. What happens now? Nathan asked. Now Mercer has to respond. He can either stay hidden and let us control the narrative, or he can come out fighting and risk exposing himself further. He'll come out fighting. Good. Vivian's smile was tired, but genuine. I'm counting on it. They sat in silence as the last light faded from Ashton Ridge. Somewhere inside the garage, Nathan heard Ellie singing to herself while doing homework, the sound of normal life continuing despite everything falling apart around them. I need to ask you something, Vivian said quietly. What? Why did you keep documenting? After it became clear nobody was listening, after Mercer threatened your daughter, after 10 years of nothing changing, why didn't you just stop? Nathan thought about it, about filing cabinets full of evidence that nobody wanted, about newspaper clippings of people he'd never met but couldn't forget, about nights spent cross-referencing VIN numbers and accident reports when he could have been sleeping, because someone had to remember them, he finally said. Marcus Webb, Robert Patterson, all 73 of them. Someone had to care that they existed, that they mattered. Even when caring changed nothing? Especially then. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. It was the first time she'd touched him deliberately. Her palm was soft against his calloused fingers. Thank you, she said. For what? For being proof that not everyone becomes what this world tries to make them. Before Nathan could respond, headlights swept across the parking lot. A car pulled up, then another, then 3 more. Nathan stood slowly, confused, as people started climbing out, people he recognized from town. Mrs. Chen with her husband, Mr. Peterson from the hardware store, Sarah's mom, Tommy's mom, a dozen others. Mrs. Chen walked up first, looking embarrassed. We saw the press conference, she said, and we wanted to apologize for believing those articles, for canceling our appointments. You don't need to... Yes, we do. Mr. Peterson stepped forward. You've been fixing our cars for 10 years, never once overcharged us, never once did work we didn't need. And we threw you under the bus the second things got complicated. Tommy's mom spoke up. I told Tommy not to talk to Ellie. I was scared and stupid and I'm sorry. One by one, they apologized, and then one by one, they started pulling folded checks from their pockets. What's this? Nathan asked. We took up a collection, Mrs. Chen said. To help with legal fees. It's not much, but... It's $18,000, Mr. Peterson interrupted. From everyone in town who's ever brought their car here. Everyone who knows you're not the person those articles said you were. Nathan stared at the checks. At the people from his failing town pooling together money they probably couldn't afford to help him fight a battle that wasn't theirs. I can't accept this, he said. Too bad. We already wrote the checks. Mrs. Chen pressed hers into his hand. You spent 10 years taking care of this town. Let us take care of you for once. They stayed for an hour, drinking coffee from the garage's ancient coffee maker and talking about everything except lawsuits and dead engines and federal investigations. Just normal conversation. Normal life. After they left, Nathan stood in the parking lot holding $18,000 in checks and trying not to cry. Vivian walked up beside him. You're not alone in this, she said softly. I know. I mean it, Nathan. You have a whole town behind you, and you have me. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who'd given up everything to stand beside someone she barely knew. Why? He asked. Why risk everything for this? Vivian thought about it. About glass towers and designer suits and a life spent chasing her dead father's approval. About a garage in Ohio that taught her more about integrity in 3 weeks than 30 years of corporate leadership ever had. Because I'm tired of being the villain in someone else's tragedy, she said. And you showed me how to be something else. Nathan didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood there holding checks written by people who barely had money to spare, while the woman who'd lost everything stood beside him and somewhere above them, Ellie was singing off-key while doing math homework. It wasn't victory. They hadn't won anything yet. But for the first time in 10 years, Nathan felt like maybe winning was actually possible. The feeling didn't last. 3 days after Vivian's press conference, Nathan's bookkeeper called at 6 in the morning. Her name was Margaret, a 70-year-old retired accountant who'd been organizing his paperwork for the past 8 years in exchange for free oil changes. "Nathan, you need to come to the shop, now." He was already awake making Ellie's lunch for school. "What's wrong?" "Just get here?" He dropped Ellie at the bus stop and drove to the garage with his stomach in knots. Margaret was waiting outside, her face pale in the early morning light. "Someone broke in last night," she said. The garage door was still locked. No broken windows, no obvious signs of forced entry. But when Nathan walked inside, he understood immediately. The filing cabinets were open, papers scattered everywhere, 10 years of documentation torn apart and left in chaos across the concrete floor. "They didn't take anything," Margaret said quietly. "Just made a mess. Like they were looking for something specific." Nathan walked slowly through the destruction. Repair orders mixed with accident reports, mixed with newspaper clippings. The careful organization he'd maintained for a decade reduced to garbage. He crouched down and started sorting through papers with shaking hands. "Nathan, it's all here. They didn't take it. They just wanted to—" He stopped, his hand closing around an empty folder. The folder that had contained the photograph of Mercer's handwritten note. Margaret watched him stand slowly. "What's missing?" "The evidence. The only piece that directly connects Mercer to criminal negligence." Nathan turned the empty folder over, like the photograph might somehow materialize. Everything else was circumstantial, but that note proved he knew about the defects and ordered them hidden anyway. "You have copies though, right?" Nathan's silence was answer enough. "Please tell me you made copies." "It was the only copy. I found it last month. I was planning to—" He stopped, chest tight. "I thought we had time." Margaret sat down heavily on an overturned crate. "What do we do?" Nathan stared at the chaos around him. 10 years of work still here, but useless without the one piece that actually mattered. The one piece that could put Mercer in prison instead of just exposing corporate negligence. "We tell Vivian," he said finally. Vivian arrived within an hour, still wearing yesterday's clothes like she'd been up all night. She stood in the middle of the destroyed garage and didn't say anything for a long moment. "They didn't trip the alarm," Nathan said, which means either they had the code or they had someone who knew how to bypass it. "Mercer's too smart to do it himself. He doesn't need to. He has money. Money buys people who are very good at breaking into places without leaving evidence." Vivian walked over to the empty filing cabinet where the photograph had been stored. "This was the only physical copy?" "Yes." "You didn't photograph it? Email it to yourself? Store it in the cloud?" "I'm a mechanic, not a tech guy. I kept physical files because that's what I know." Nathan's voice was tight with frustration. "I didn't think—" "It's not your fault, isn't it? You told me Mercer would come after us. I should have protected the evidence better." "Nathan, that note was the difference between corporate negligence and criminal conspiracy, between Mercer facing fines and Mercer facing prison." He kicked at a pile of scattered papers. "And I left it sitting in an unlocked filing cabinet like an idiot." Vivian grabbed his arm. "Stop. We work with what we have." "We don't have anything. Not anymore. We have your testimony. We have 10 years of documentation showing a pattern of cover-ups. We have financial records proving motive." She gestured at the papers covering the floor. "This isn't over. It's not enough." "Then we make it enough." Margaret spoke up from her spot near the door. "There might be something else." They both turned. "When I found the note last month, I was going through old repair folders, organizing them chronologically for the federal prosecutor." She walked over to a stack of boxes Nathan had moved to the corner. "But I didn't finish. There are still 3 boxes I haven't gone through yet." Nathan stared at the boxes. "You think there might be more evidence?" "I think Mercer was sloppy. If he accidentally included one handwritten note in a shipment, he might have included others." Margaret pulled the first box down. "It's worth checking." They spent the next 6 hours going through every paper in those 3 boxes. Repair orders, shipping manifests, warranty claims. Nathan's hands left grease stains on decade-old documents, while Vivian cross-referenced everything against her laptop database. Ellie came home from school and did her homework in the corner, occasionally asking questions they barely heard. By 3 p.m., they'd found nothing. By 5 p.m., Nathan was ready to give up. By 6:30, Margaret pulled out a crumpled envelope from the bottom of the third box and went completely still. "Nathan!" Her voice made him look up from the repair order he'd been staring at for 10 minutes without actually reading. "What?" She handed him the envelope without a word. Inside was a photograph, slightly blurry, taken with what looked like a cheap phone camera, but clear enough to see what mattered. It showed a conference room. 5 men in expensive suits sitting around a table. And on the table, clearly visible, was the engineering report Nathan had written 10 years ago. The one warning about catastrophic engine failure. The photo was dated 3 weeks after Nathan submitted the report. 3 weeks before Mercer claimed it had been lost in a filing error. Vivian leaned over Nathan's shoulder, reading the names on the placards in front of each man. "That's the executive board, the same 5 men who approved production of the CX-7 series." "They're looking at my report," Nathan said slowly, "which means Mercer didn't bury it alone. They all saw it. They all knew." Margaret pulled out a second photo from the envelope. This one showed a whiteboard covered in financial calculations. Projected costs for a full recall versus projected costs for legal settlements. The settlement column was circled in red. "They did a cost-benefit analysis," Vivian said. Her voice was very quiet. "They calculated how much it would cost to fix the problem versus how much it would cost to just pay off victims. And they chose victims." Nathan looked at the photos again, his hands shaking. Where did these come from? Margaret checked the envelope. There was a sticky note attached to the inside flap, handwriting he didn't recognize. Someone at Crossline took these during the meeting. Whoever it was hid them in a repair folder and sent them here. Why? Maybe they had a conscience. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they wanted insurance. Margaret shrugged. Does it matter? We have proof now. Proof that the entire executive board knowingly approved defective vehicles. Vivian was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling the federal prosecutor. This changes everything. She walked outside to make the call while Nathan sat staring at the photos. 5 men in a conference room making calculations about human lives, deciding that 73 deaths was an acceptable trade-off for profit margins. He thought about Marcus Webb, Robert Patterson, all the names he'd memorized from newspaper obituaries, all the people reduced to numbers on a whiteboard. Ellie appeared at his elbow, looking at the photos curiously. What's that? Evidence. For the superhero stuff? Nathan managed a weak smile. Yeah, for the superhero stuff. Are you winning? He looked at his daughter's hopeful expression and didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. That even with evidence, even with photos and documentation and federal prosecutors, men like Mercer usually found a way to walk free. We're trying, baby. Ellie nodded seriously. That's what superheroes do. They try really hard even when it's scary. She went back to her homework while Nathan wondered when his 6-year-old had become wiser than him. Vivian came back inside, her expression tight. The prosecutor wants to meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. in Cincinnati. He's bringing the lead investigator and someone from the DOJ. That's fast. That's what happens when you hand them evidence of corporate conspiracy. She sat down beside him. This is it, Nathan. This is what we've been working toward. What if it's not enough? It has to be. That's not how the world works. You know that. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took one of the photos from his hand. You see this? She pointed at the whiteboard calculations. This is what I was taught to do. Reduce everything to numbers. Maximize profit. Minimize risk. You're not like them. I was exactly like them, for years. She set the photo down carefully. I sat in rooms like this and made decisions like this and convinced myself it was just business, that emotions were weaknesses, that caring about individual outcomes was naive. But you changed, because someone showed me what it looks like to choose people over profit, to document the truth even when nobody's listening, to fight for what's right even when you're terrified. She looked at him. You did that. You spent 10 years being the person I should have been. Nathan didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there in his destroyed garage with evidence scattered around them and his daughter doing homework in the corner and tried to believe that tomorrow might actually matter. That night, Vivian stayed. Not in a hotel in Cincinnati or her empty Chicago apartment, but in the garage. She helped Nathan organize the recovered photos and supporting documentation. They worked until midnight, building a timeline that connected the original engineering report to the executive board meeting to 10 years of ignored warnings to 73 deaths. Around 1 a.m., Ellie wandered downstairs in her pajamas. "Can't sleep again?" Nathan asked. "Vivian's still here. She's helping with work stuff." Ellie climbed onto Nathan's lap, her small weight warm against his chest. "Is she going to stay forever?" "She has her own house in Chicago. But she's here a lot now." Nathan exchanged a glance with Vivian, who was trying very hard to look busy with her laptop. "She's helping Dad with important stuff." "I know, the superhero stuff." Ellie yawned. "I like when she's here. She makes you smile more." "I smile plenty, not like when she's here." Ellie looked at Vivian seriously. "Do you like my dad?" Vivian's fingers froze over her keyboard. Yes, your dad is a good person." Tommy says when grown-ups work together late and smile a lot, it means they like each other. "Tommy really needs to stop being the town relationship expert," Nathan muttered. "So do you like him?" Vivian met Nathan's eyes across the garage. Something passed between them that Nathan couldn't quite name, but felt in his chest like a physical weight. "Yes," Vivian said quietly, "I like him." Ellie grinned triumphantly. "I knew it." Nathan felt his face getting hot. "Bed, right now, before you cause any more trouble." "But I was right." "Bed." He carried Ellie upstairs and tucked her in, listening to her chatter about Tommy's mom's predictions, and whether Vivian would come to her next soccer game, and if rich people knew how to make pancakes. When he came back down, Vivian was packing up her laptop with very deliberate focus. "Sorry about that," Nathan said. "She's at the age where everything is very dramatic and simple." "Is it wrong?" "What she said." Nathan stopped. "What?" Vivian turned to face him. "Is it wrong that I like you? That somewhere between documentation and federal prosecutors and fighting your fights, I started caring about you as more than just a witness or a partner in this mess?" Nathan didn't have words. "This isn't the time. We're in the middle of so. I know the timing is terrible, and we have a meeting tomorrow that could determine everything, and my life is a disaster right now." She stepped closer. "But your daughter asked a direct question, and I gave an honest answer because apparently you've taught me that honesty matters, even when it's inconvenient." Nathan's heart was doing something complicated in his chest. "Vivian, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know that—" He kissed her. It was clumsy and awkward, and tasted like coffee and evidence and desperation. Vivian made a surprised sound and then kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "That was—" Vivian started. "Yeah. We should probably—" "We really shouldn't." "But we're going to anyway?" "Probably." They stood there in the flickering fluorescent light of Nathan's garage, surrounded by 10 years of evidence and tomorrow's uncertainties, and kissed again because the world was falling apart around them, and they'd both been alone for too long. Later, Vivian fell asleep on the couch in Nathan's office, her expensive coat draped over her like a blanket. Nathan covered her with something warmer and sat at his desk, staring at the photos that would either save them or mean nothing at all. The sun came up over Ashton Ridge the same way it always did, indifferent to hopes or fears or federal prosecutor meetings that might change everything. They left for Cincinnati at 7 a.m. Margaret agreed to take Ellie to school and pick her up after. Nathan wore his one good suit that he'd last worn to his wife's funeral 8 years ago. It still didn't fit right. Vivian drove. She was quiet, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "You okay?" Nathan asked. "Terrified." "That's honest. I'm trying this new thing where I tell the truth even when it makes me look weak." She glanced at him. "Learning from a good teacher." The federal building in Cincinnati was all glass and steel and security checkpoints. They were escorted to a conference room on the 8th floor where 3 people waited. Assistant District Attorney James Warren, FBI Special Agent Lisa Chen, and a woman in a suit so sharp it could cut glass who introduced herself as Deputy Director Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Justice. Nathan had never felt more out of place in his life. "Mr. Keller, Miss Cross." Warren gestured at chairs. "Thank you for coming." They sat. Nathan's hands were sweating. Warren spread the photos across the conference table. These are remarkable. Where did you get them? They were hidden in a repair order shipment, Nathan said. We think someone inside Crossline took them during the executive board meeting and sent them to me for safekeeping. Agent Chen leaned forward. Any idea who? No, but it had to be someone with access to that meeting. An assistant, maybe, or a junior executive. We'll follow up on that. Warren pulled up something on his laptop. I've reviewed all the documentation you provided. 10 years of repair orders, warranty claims, shipping manifests. It's thorough. But, Nathan heard the word coming, but without direct evidence connecting specific executives to knowingly concealing defects, we have a corporate negligence case, which is significant, but it's not criminal conspiracy. Those photos show them looking at my engineering report, Nathan said. The report that warned them the engines were deadly, and then they approved production anyway. The photos show them in a meeting with a document. A good defense attorney will argue they were reviewing hundreds of engineering reports, and this one got lost in the shuffle. What about the whiteboard calculations? They literally chose to pay off victims instead of fixing the problem. Cost-benefit analysis is standard corporate practice. Distasteful, but not illegal. Warren looked genuinely sympathetic. I'm not saying they're not guilty. I'm saying proving it beyond reasonable doubt is going to be difficult. Vivian spoke up for the first time. What about Daniel Mercer's handwritten note, the one ordering employees to remove defective engines from warranty records? We'd need the original. Is that something you can provide? Nathan and Vivian exchanged a glance. It was stolen, Nathan said. Someone broke into my garage 3 days ago and took it. Warren closed his laptop slowly. Mr. Keller, I need you to understand something. What you've documented is extraordinary. The most comprehensive evidence of corporate malfeasance I've seen in 15 years of prosecution. But without physical evidence directly linking executives to criminal intent, they killed 73 people, Nathan said. His voice was shaking. They knew the engines were defective. They knew people would die, and they built them anyway because it was cheaper than doing the right thing. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence, and evidence isn't proof. Warren leaned back. I can go after Crossline Motors as a corporation. I can levy fines, force recalls, impose oversight, but putting individual executives in prison requires an evidentiary standard we don't currently meet. The room went silent. Nathan felt 10 years of work crumbling, 10 years of documentation and sacrifice and believing that truth eventually mattered, all of it reduced to not quite enough. Deputy Director Mitchell finally spoke. She'd been quiet through the entire meeting, just watching and listening. There's one more option, she said. Everyone turned. We flip someone. Find an executive who's willing to testify against the others in exchange for immunity. She looked at Nathan. You said you think someone inside took these photos. Someone with a conscience. We find that person and convince them to cooperate. How? Nathan asked. The same way we always do. Pressure, fear, self-preservation. Mitchell's smile was cold. We start publicly naming everyone who was in that conference room. Let them know we're investigating them individually for criminal conspiracy. And then we wait to see who breaks first. Warren shook his head. That's a gamble. If none of them flip, we've shown our hand for nothing. And if one of them does flip, we have everything we need. Mitchell turned to Vivian. You worked with these men. You know them. Who's the weak link? Vivian thought about it. About 5 men in expensive suits making calculations about acceptable deaths. About which one of them might actually have a soul left. David Huang, she said finally. VP of Engineering. He was the youngest person in that room. Only 28 when this started. I remember... She stopped. I remember him arguing against some of Mercer's cost-cutting measures, quietly. He always backed down when Mercer pushed back, but he tried. That's not much, Warren said. It's more than the others gave us. Mitchell stood. I'll have FBI agents at his house by tonight. We make it clear he's facing 20 years for conspiracy to commit negligent homicide, and then we offer him immunity if he testifies. What if he doesn't break? Nathan asked. Mitchell looked at him with something that might have been respect. Then you spent 10 years documenting the truth for nothing, but at least you'll know you tried. It wasn't the answer Nathan wanted, but it was the only answer they had. They drove back to Ashton Ridge in silence. The sky was turning dark, storm clouds rolling in from the west. Rain started hitting the windshield somewhere outside Columbus. "I'm sorry," Vivian said quietly. "For what?" "For not being enough. For my press conference and my testimony and all of it still not being enough to put them away." Nathan watched rain stream down the window. "It's not your fault. Feels like it should be someone's fault. It's Mercer's fault. It's the board's fault. It's a system that protects rich people and grinds up everyone else." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "But it's not your fault." They pulled into Ashton Ridge as the storm really started. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the town in brief flashes. Nathan could see his garage ahead, the lights on in the apartment above where Margaret was probably helping Ellie with homework. Vivian parked but didn't get out, just sat there with rain hammering the roof. "What if Huang doesn't flip?" she asked. "Then we lost." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Nathan stared at his garage, his entire world visible through a rain-streaked windshield. 10 years of work, 73 dead people who deserve justice, all of it coming down to whether one man values his freedom more than his loyalty. That's not fair. No, but it's real. They sat in the car while rain pounded around them and lightning turned the world bright and dark, bright and dark. Nathan thought about giving up, about walking away and going back to fixing trucks and raising his daughter and pretending the past 10 years hadn't happened. It would be easier, safer, smarter. But then he thought about Marcus Webb's widow, Robert Patterson's children, 73 families who would never get closure if he quit now. "We wait," he said finally. "We wait and see if Huang breaks. And if he doesn't..." "If he doesn't?" Nathan didn't have an answer. So he just got out of the car and ran through the rain to his garage, Vivian following behind him. Margaret was waiting inside with Ellie, both of them looking worried. "How did it go?" Margaret asked. Nathan looked at his daughter's hopeful face and couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. "We're making progress." "That's good, right?" "Yeah, baby, that's good." Ellie hugged him, her small arms tight around his waist. Over her head, Nathan met Vivian's eyes. She looked as exhausted as he felt. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Vivian stayed again. Not working this time, just sitting beside Nathan on the couch in his office, her head on his shoulder, both of them too tired to do anything but exist in the same space. "I meant what I said," Vivian said quietly. "About liking you. I know, even if this all falls apart, even if Huang doesn't flip and Mercer walks free and everything we've done amounts to nothing." She lifted her head to look at him. "I'm glad I met you. I'm glad I got to see what real integrity looks like." Nathan kissed her forehead. "We haven't lost yet. But we might?" "Yeah, we might." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other on a couch that was too small, in a garage that smelled like oil and old paper, waiting for a phone call that might never come. The call came at 3 a.m. Nathan woke to his phone buzzing. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Keller?" A woman's voice, professional. "This is Special Agent Chen. We need you in Cincinnati immediately." Nathan sat up, his heart pounding. "What happened?" "David Huang just walked into the federal building with his attorney. He's ready to cooperate." Nathan and Vivian made it to Cincinnati in 2 hours, which meant Nathan drove 20 miles over the speed limit through rain that turned the highway into a river. Vivian didn't complain, just gripped the door handle and stayed quiet while he pushed his ancient truck harder than it had been pushed in years. They arrived at the federal building at 5:30 a.m. The lobby was empty, except for a security guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Agent Chen met them at the elevators, looking tired but sharp in a way that made Nathan think she'd been awake all night. "Huang's upstairs with his attorney and the prosecutor," she said as they rode up. "He's been talking for 2 hours. Hasn't stopped." "What's he saying?" Vivian asked. "Everything." Chen's smile was grim. Names, dates, email chains, recorded conversations. He kept copies of everything over the past 10 years. Said he knew eventually someone would need proof. The elevator doors opened onto the 8th floor. Chen led them down a hallway to a room with a one-way mirror. Through the glass, Nathan could see David Huang sitting at a table. He looked smaller than Nathan remembered. Thinner. The kind of exhausted that came from carrying guilt for too long. Warren was across from him, taking notes while Huang talked. His attorney sat beside him, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd heard too many confessions to be shocked by anything anymore. "Can we hear?" Nathan asked. Chen flipped a switch and Huang's voice came through speakers. "Knew it was wrong. I told Mercer the data didn't support production approval, that we needed at least 6 more months of testing." Huang's hands were shaking. "He said 6 months would cost us market position, that our competitors were already launching similar models, that if we waited, we'd lose millions in potential revenue." "And you signed off anyway," Warren said. It wasn't a question. "I was 28 years old. Mercer was COO. He had 40 years of experience and connections everywhere. When he told me to approve the design, Huang stopped, his voice breaking. "I told myself he knew better than me, that I was being overcautious, that the risk assessments were probably wrong." "But you knew they weren't wrong." "I knew." Huang put his face in his hands. "I knew, and I approved it anyway, because I was scared of losing my job. Scared of being blacklisted like—" He stopped. "Like who?" Warren leaned forward. "Like Nathan Keller. Mercer used to tell us about him, about what happens to engineers who don't follow orders, who put their personal ethics above company needs." Huang looked up, his eyes red. "He made Keller an example, a warning to the rest of us about what happens when you try to be a hero." Nathan felt Vivian's hand find his in the dark observation room. Warren slid a document across the table. "Is this your signature?" "Yes. Production approval for the CX-7 series. Dated March 2014. Huang's voice was hollow. 3 months before the first reported engine failure. "And this one?" "Warranty claim denial, October 2015. Customer reported fuel system malfunction. I signed off on classifying it as user error instead of manufacturer defect." Warren kept sliding documents. Huang kept confirming. Each signature a decision, each decision a life. "The Portland accident," Warren said quietly. "June 2016, family of 4. Huang closed his eyes. "I remember." The mother called the warranty department 3 times before the accident. Said the car was making strange noises, smelled like burning. We sent her to a local mechanic who found nothing wrong. "Because you'd instructed mechanics to avoid identifying manufacturer defects." Mercer instructed. "I implemented." Huang opened his eyes. "That's not an excuse. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just telling you how it worked. Mercer gave orders. I made sure they were followed, and people died because I was too scared to say no." The room went quiet except for the sound of Warren's pen on paper. "I need you to tell me about Daniel Mercer," Warren finally said. "Everything you know about his direct involvement." Huang nodded and started talking again. Nathan and Vivian listened for another hour. Huang detailed meetings, email chains, recorded phone calls. He had documentation going back to Nathan's original engineering report, proof that Mercer hadn't just buried it, but had actively ordered other engineers to contradict its findings. "There's more," Huang said. He looked at his attorney, who nodded. "Mercer didn't just hide defects. He manipulated crash test data. He bribed safety inspectors. He threatened journalists who tried to investigate early accident reports." Warren's expression didn't change, but Nathan saw his knuckles go white around his pen. "You have proof of this?" "I have copies of wire transfers, signed NDAs, audio recordings from meetings where Mercer explicitly discussed paying people off." Huang pulled out a flash drive. "It's all here. 10 years of insurance. I told myself I was keeping it for protection. Really, I was just too cowardly to use it until now." "What changed?" Huang was quiet for a long moment. "I saw Vivian Cross's press conference, saw her stand up and tell the truth even though it cost her everything. And I realized I'd spent 10 years hiding behind fear while people died." He looked directly at the one-way mirror like he could see Nathan standing there. "Then I heard about Nathan Keller, about how he'd been documenting everything we tried to hide, about how he'd spent a decade trying to make someone listen." Huang's voice cracked. "I'm one of the reasons nobody listened. I'm one of the reasons he was blacklisted. I signed the reports that called him incompetent. I backed Mercer's lies because it was easier than telling the truth." He wiped his eyes. "So I called my attorney at midnight and told her I was done being a coward, that I was ready to testify against everyone, including myself." Warren took the flash drive carefully. "You understand what you're admitting to? You'll face charges. Prison time." "I know." Your attorney has negotiated immunity in exchange for cooperation, but that immunity only covers testimony. If you're lying, if you're holding back information, I'm not. Huang met Warren's eyes. I'm done lying. Whatever happens to me, I deserve it, but Mercer deserves worse. Chen turned off the speaker. Nathan stood in the dark observation room, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him. 10 years of being called a liar, a fraud, a disgraced engineer with a vendetta. And here was proof that everything he'd documented was real, that he'd been right all along. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief. He's credible, Chen said, and his documentation backs up everything you've been saying for a decade. So what happens now? Vivian asked. Now we build an airtight case. Huang's testimony plus his evidence plus Nathan's documentation equals conspiracy, fraud, criminal negligence, evidence tampering, and about 15 other charges. Chen's smile was sharp. We're going to bury them. Warren came out 20 minutes later, holding the flash drive like it was made of gold. Mr. Keller, he shook Nathan's hand. I owe you an apology. When you first brought this to authorities 10 years ago, we should have listened. You weren't the prosecutor back then. No. But I'm part of a system that failed you. That made you spend a decade fighting alone because we dismissed you as unreliable. Warren's grip tightened. That ends today. I'm personally guaranteeing you'll be recognized as the primary whistleblower in this case. Your documentation will be entered as evidence. Your testimony will be central to prosecution. Nathan didn't know what to say. He'd imagined this moment for 10 years. Recognition, validation, someone official finally admitting he'd been right. It didn't feel the way he'd thought it would. What about Mercer? He asked. Arrest warrant will be issued by end of day. We'll have him in custody within 48 hours. Warren glanced at Vivian. You should know, Ms. Cross, that your testimony will also be crucial. As former CEO, your willingness to testify against your own company carries significant weight. I'll testify to whatever you need, Vivian said. Even if it means admitting you were aware of some questionable practices during your tenure. Vivian didn't hesitate. I spent years pretending I didn't see things I should have questioned. If that makes me culpable, then put me on the stand and let me say it publicly. Warren nodded with something that looked like respect. The preliminary hearing is set for 3 weeks from now. I'll need both of you to prepare testimony. Expect long days and hostile defense attorneys. We'll be ready, Nathan said. They left the federal building as the sun came up over Cincinnati. The rain had stopped, leaving everything wet and clean and temporarily hopeful. Nathan's phone rang. Margaret. How's Ellie? He asked. Eating breakfast and asking why you left so early. I told her superhero business. Margaret paused. Was I right? Yeah, you were right. Good. Because that little girl has been bragging to everyone at school that her dad is fighting bad guys. Don't make her a liar. Nathan smiled despite everything. I won't. They drove back to Ashton Ridge in silence, exhausted but unable to sleep. Vivian dozed against the window while Nathan watched the highway unfold. Somewhere out there, Daniel Mercer was still free, still thinking he'd won, still believing money and connections could protect him from consequences. Nathan hoped he was wrong, but he'd seen too many rich men walk free to count on it. By the time they got back to the garage, it was almost noon. Margaret had picked Ellie up from school early, and they were waiting in the office, both looking worried. Ellie ran to Nathan the moment he walked in. Dad, Mrs. Chen from next door said FBI people were at our house last night. Is that true? Nathan shot Margaret a look. Mrs. Chen has a big mouth, Margaret said unapologetically. But yes, there were federal agents verifying your residence for official records. Are we in trouble? Ellie asked. No, baby. The opposite. We're helping catch the bad guys. Like real FBI stuff? Like real FBI stuff. Ellie's eyes went huge. Can I tell Tommy? You can tell anyone you want. She was out the door before Nathan could blink, running toward Tommy's house to deliver the news that her dad was officially working with the FBI. Margaret waited until she was gone. So we have a cooperating witness, federal charges being filed, arrest warrants incoming. Nathan sat down heavily. We might actually win this. Might? Nothing's certain until Mercer's in handcuffs. Margaret studied him. You've been fighting for this for 10 years. You'd think you'd look happier." Nathan didn't answer, because how could he explain that winning felt like losing when 73 people were still dead? That justice delayed for a decade wasn't really justice at all? Vivian spoke up from where she'd collapsed on the couch. "He's scared it won't stick, that Mercer will find a way out." "Will he?" Margaret asked. "Probably not. The evidence is overwhelming. Huang's testimony is damning. Mercer's lawyers are good, but they're not miracle workers." "But there's a chance. There's always a chance." Vivian closed her eyes. That's what Nathan's learned, that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee the right outcome. You can fight perfectly and still lose. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she walked over and squeezed Nathan's shoulder. "Well, you haven't lost yet, so maybe save the despair for after the trial." She left to run errands, and Nathan sat in his garage surrounded by evidence and exhaustion and the creeping certainty that 3 weeks from now, everything would either vindicate 10 years of work or prove it had all been for nothing. Vivian moved from the couch to sit beside him. "Talk to me." "About what?" "About why you look like you just lost instead of won." Nathan gestured at the filing cabinets. "All of this. 10 years of documentation, 73 deaths, hundreds of injuries, and it took a billionaire CEO having a crisis of conscience and a guilty engineer finally breaking for anyone to take it seriously. That's not fair to yourself, isn't it? Without you and Huang, I'm still just the crazy mechanic in Ohio that nobody believes. My evidence didn't matter. My testimony didn't matter. I didn't matter until someone with money and credentials decided to care. You mattered to the families of the victims. Did I? Because they're still dead. Nothing I did brought them back or prevented their deaths. I just documented the aftermath like some ghoulish accountant keeping score." Vivian grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Stop. You spent 10 years refusing to forget people everyone else wanted buried. You gave them names and faces and evidence when the system tried to reduce them to acceptable losses. That matters. It doesn't bring them back. No, but it means they weren't erased, that someone fought for them even after they were gone." She let go, her voice softening. "That's not nothing, Nathan. That's everything." He wanted to believe her, but 10 years of fighting had taught him that everything could still feel like nothing when you were too tired to see the difference. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Warren's team contacted Nathan daily with questions. They needed clarification on specific repair orders, timeline verification, technical explanations of engine failures that a jury would understand. Nathan walked them through everything methodically. He'd spent 10 years building this evidence. He knew every folder, every document, every detail. Vivian prepared her own testimony, working with her attorneys to navigate the complicated reality of being both witness and potential defendant. She'd been CEO during the later years of the cover-up. Even though she hadn't known the full extent, she'd signed off on things she should have questioned. "They might charge me," she told Nathan one night. "Warren says they're still deciding." What would the charges be? Negligent oversight, failure to investigate. Basically being the public face of a criminal enterprise without bothering to look behind the curtain. She stared at her laptop. "I'd deserve it." "You didn't know." "I should have. That's the whole point. I was so focused on stock prices and quarterly earnings that I never asked where the profits were coming from." She closed the laptop. "I was complicit through ignorance, and ignorance isn't actually an excuse when you're in charge." Nathan didn't argue because she wasn't wrong. Daniel Mercer was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Nathan watched the news coverage from his garage, seeing Mercer led out of his Florida mansion in handcuffs. He looked smaller on television, older, almost ordinary. The news anchors called it a major development in corporate fraud. They showed clips of Vivian's press conference, mentioned Nathan's decade of documentation, called it one of the largest criminal conspiracy cases in automotive history. But they didn't show the victims. Didn't name Marcus Webb or Robert Patterson or any of the 73 people who'd died so Crossline Motors could save money on a recall. Nathan turned off the television. Ellie came home from school that day, practically vibrating with excitement. "Everyone saw your name on the news. Mrs. Patterson said you're famous." "I'm not famous, baby. Tommy's mom said you're a hero." "Tommy's mom is being generous. Can I take your picture to school for show and tell?" "Absolutely not." But Ellie did anyway, bringing in a photo of Nathan from last year's Father's Day celebration. According to Margaret, She told her entire class that her dad was helping the FBI catch criminals and that bad guys were going to jail because he never stopped fighting. Nathan didn't know whether to be proud or horrified. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than Nathan wanted. He woke up that morning feeling sick, his hands shaking while he tried to tie a tie he barely remembered how to knot. Vivian helped, her fingers steady against his collar. "You're going to be fine." "What if I freeze up there? What if I can't explain things properly?" "You've been explaining this for 10 years. You could do it in your sleep." She finished the tie and stepped back. "Just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask." They drove to the courthouse together. The building was surrounded by news vans and reporters. Nathan saw protesters with signs, some supporting Crossline employees worried about losing jobs, others demanding justice for victims. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Nathan recognized faces from the victim families: Marcus Webb's widow, Robert Patterson in a wheelchair near the front, dozens of others whose lives had been destroyed by faulty engines and corporate greed. Warren met them outside the courtroom. "Mercer's attorneys are trying to get your documentation thrown out as hearsay. They're claiming you had motive to fabricate evidence." "Of course they are," Nathan said. "Don't worry, we have Huang's testimony to corroborate everything. And the physical evidence from his flash drive backs up your documentation perfectly." Warren checked his watch. "You're up second, after the FBI's forensic accountant establishes the financial timeline." Nathan nodded, his throat dry. The hearing started. Nathan sat in the gallery beside Vivian, watching Daniel Mercer enter with 4 attorneys surrounding him like bodyguards. Mercer looked confident, relaxed, like this was a minor inconvenience instead of a criminal trial. The FBI's accountant testified first, laying out 10 years of financial records showing how Crossline's profits increased directly alongside warranty claim denials and ignored safety reports. She had charts and graphs and numbers that painted a clear picture of corruption. Mercer's attorneys objected constantly. The judge overruled most of them. Then it was Nathan's turn. He walked to the witness stand on legs that felt disconnected from his body. The courtroom was huge, intimidating, every eye on him. Warren stood. "Please state your name for the record." "Nathan Keller." "And your occupation?" "I own a repair garage in Ashton Ridge, Ohio." "And prior to that?" "I was an automotive engineer for Crossline Motors from 2011 to 2014. Warren pulled up a document on the screen behind Nathan. "Do you recognize this?" Nathan looked. It was his original engineering report, the one warning about catastrophic engine failure. "Yes. I wrote that in January 2014. "And what happened after you submitted it?" "Nothing, for about 3 weeks. Then I was called into a meeting with Daniel Mercer." Nathan's voice was steady now, factual. "He told me the report was being dismissed as overcautious, that production was proceeding as scheduled." "How did you respond?" "I argued, showed him the data again, explained that the engine design had fundamental flaws that would result in fires, brake failures, and deaths." Nathan looked directly at Mercer. "He told me to drop it or I'd be fired." "And did you drop it?" "No. I went to the engineering department head, then to the safety compliance office, then to HR. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Everyone told me the same thing, that I was overreacting, that Mercer's approval was enough, that I needed to be a team player." "So what did you do?" "I resigned. My wife had just died and I had a daughter to raise. I couldn't work for a company that valued money over human lives." Warren pulled up another document. "And this? That's the first repair order I received 6 months after resigning. Mercer showed up at my garage with a defective CX-7 engine and told me he needed it fixed quietly." "Did you comply?" "Eventually, but I documented everything first. Photographed the defects, recorded the serial numbers, kept copies of the shipping manifests." Nathan gestured toward the evidence table where his filing cabinets had been transported. "For 10 years, every engine they sent me was documented, every failure point, every safety hazard, everything they tried to hide." "Why?" It was a simple question, but Nathan had to think about the answer. "Because someone had to remember," he finally said. "The people who died deserved someone who wouldn't forget them, who wouldn't let them be reduced to statistics or acceptable losses." His voice cracked slightly. "They deserved someone to care that they'd existed." The courtroom was completely silent. Warren nodded slowly. No further questions. Mercer's lead attorney stood. His name was Richard Vance, and he had the kind of expensive suit that screamed corporate defense lawyer. Mr. Keller, you were fired from Crossline Motors for incompetence, weren't you? I resigned. After being told your work was substandard and your engineering report was rejected by multiple departments. My report was rejected because it was inconvenient, not because it was wrong, or because it was based on flawed data and overcautious assumptions. Vance smiled. You're not exactly an unbiased observer, are you? You have a personal vendetta against Crossline Motors and specifically against Daniel Mercer. Nathan kept his voice level. I have a problem with companies that kill people for profit. That's a dramatic interpretation. Isn't it true that automotive manufacturing involves inherent risks? That no vehicle is perfectly safe? It's also true that vehicles can be made safer when engineers identify defects, which is what my report did. A report that was reviewed by multiple qualified engineers and deemed unnecessary. Engineers who were instructed by Mercer to dismiss my findings. Do you have proof of that instruction? Nathan hesitated. The handwritten note was gone, stolen from his garage. Vance pounced on the silence. You don't, do you? You're asking this court to believe that Daniel Mercer, a respected executive with 40 years of industry experience, personally orchestrated a conspiracy to hide defects. Based on what? Your word? Based on 10 years of documentation showing a pattern of documentation you created yourself, in a garage, with no oversight, no verification, no chain of custody that would prove these records weren't fabricated. Warren stood. Objection. Mr. Keller's documentation has been verified against independent accident reports, warranty claims, and testimony from cooperating witness David Huang. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Vance, the documentation's authenticity has been established. Move on. Vance nodded, unbothered. Mr. Keller, you're currently in a relationship with Vivian Cross, correct? Nathan's stomach dropped. That's not relevant, isn't it? Ms. Cross lost her position as CEO after making public accusations against Crossline Motors, accusations that conveniently align with your decade-long vendetta. One might wonder if you manipulated a vulnerable woman experiencing a professional crisis to support your claims. That's... Nathan's hands clenched. That's not what happened. No? So you're not romantically involved with the former CEO whose testimony is central to this case? Warren objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the courtroom like smoke. Vance smiled. No further questions. Nathan left the stand feeling like he'd been stripped bare, like 10 years of work had been reduced to a vendetta and a relationship. Vivian testified next. She was calm, precise, and unflinching in admitting what she'd failed to see during her tenure as CEO. I didn't ask enough questions, she said. I trusted executives who told me everything was fine. I prioritized growth and profit without investigating where that profit came from. She looked at Mercer. That was my failure. But the conspiracy itself, the deliberate concealment of known defects, that was orchestrated by Daniel Mercer and the executive board. And I will testify to that until I can't speak anymore. Vance tried to break her, suggested she was scorned, vindictive, romantically compromised. Vivian didn't flinch. I'm not here because of my relationship with Nathan Keller, she said. I'm here because 73 people are dead and I was the public face of the company that killed them. That's my burden to carry. But Daniel Mercer gave the orders, and I won't let him hide behind me anymore. David Huang testified last. He walked through every meeting, every email, every recorded conversation. His voice shook but never stopped. He admitted his guilt, accepted his culpability, and provided evidence that corroborated everything Nathan had documented. By the end of the day, Mercer's confident expression had cracked. The judge set a trial date for 6 weeks out. Nathan and Vivian left the courthouse together, pushing through reporters shouting questions. They drove back to Ashton Ridge in silence, both too drained to speak. Margaret was waiting at the garage with Ellie. The little girl ran to Nathan immediately. Did you win? Not yet, baby, but we're trying. Trying is what superheroes do, Ellie said seriously. Nathan picked her up, holding her close. Yeah, it is. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Nathan and Vivian sat on the garage roof watching stars appear over Ashton Ridge. It was something they'd started doing when the fighting got too heavy. A way to remember the world was bigger than courtrooms and evidence. Vance is going to keep pushing the relationship angle, Vivian said quietly. I know. He'll try to make us look like we conspired together, that I'm only testifying because I'm romantically compromised. Does it change anything? No. She leaned against him. But it might hurt the case. Make us less credible to a jury. Nathan thought about it. About 10 years of fighting. About finally having evidence that mattered. About the possibility that his relationship with Vivian could be the thing that undermined everything. We should probably, he started. Don't. Vivian cut him off. Don't suggest we pretend this isn't happening. Don't suggest we distance ourselves for the sake of optics. But if it hurts the case, then it hurts the case. But I'm not going to hide what I feel because Daniel Mercer's lawyers want to use it against us. She turned to look at him. I spent 30 years hiding who I was to maintain a professional image. I'm done with that. Nathan kissed her, soft and deliberate under a sky full of stars. Okay, he said, then we do this together, whatever happens. Whatever happens, she agreed. 6 weeks had never felt shorter. The trial started on a Monday in late spring when Ashton Ridge was finally shaking off winter and pretending summer might actually come. Nathan woke up at 4 a.m., unable to sleep, and found Vivian already awake in the kitchen making coffee that neither of them would drink. You ready? She asked. No. Me neither. They stood in the kitchen watching the sun come up, both dressed in court clothes that felt like costumes. Nathan kept adjusting his tie. Vivian kept checking her phone for messages that weren't coming. Ellie shuffled downstairs at 6, rubbing her eyes. Is today the big day? Yeah, baby, today's the big day. Are you scared? Nathan crouched down to her level. Terrified. But you're doing it anyway. That's what bravery is, being scared and doing it anyway. Ellie hugged him tight. You're the bravest person I know. Nathan held his daughter and tried to believe her. Margaret arrived at 7 to take Ellie to school. She squeezed Nathan's shoulder on her way out. Make them pay. That's the plan. The courthouse was even more packed than the preliminary hearing. National media had picked up the story. Victims' families filled the gallery. Outside, protesters carried signs with photos of the dead. Marcus Webb's face was there. Robert Patterson's. 73 photos that reduced a decade of corporate murder to images on poster board. Warren met them in the hallway outside the courtroom. Jury selection is done. 8 women, 4 men, ages ranging from 26 to 68. Mix of blue collar and white collar. Should be favorable. Should be? Vivian asked. Mercer's team tried to stack it with corporate executives. We blocked most of them. But there are 2 jurors with significant investment portfolios who might sympathize with business interests over victims. Warren checked his notes. We're leading with Huang's testimony, establishing the conspiracy first, then using Nathan's documentation to prove pattern and scope. What about Mercer? Nathan asked. He won't testify. Too risky. Vance will rely on discrediting witnesses and creating reasonable doubt. Warren looked at them both. He's going to come after your relationship again. Make it seem coordinated, rehearsed. Let him try, Vivian said. Inside the courtroom, Daniel Mercer sat at the defense table, looking every bit the respectable executive. Silver hair perfectly styled. Suit probably worth more than Nathan's truck. He glanced at Nathan once with an expression that might have been contempt or might have been confidence. Nathan couldn't tell the difference anymore. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The trial began. Warren's opening statement was clean and brutal. He walked the jury through 10 years of evidence, showed them the engineering report Nathan had written, explained how Mercer had buried it, detailed the 73 deaths that followed. This is not a story about corporate negligence, Warren said. This is a story about deliberate, calculated murder, about executives who knew people would die and decided those deaths were acceptable costs of doing business. He pointed at Mercer. That man didn't accidentally kill 73 people. He chose to. And for 10 years he silenced everyone who tried to stop him. Vance's opening was different, smoother. He painted Mercer as a dedicated executive who'd devoted his life to American manufacturing, who'd made tough decisions in an industry with inherent risks. The prosecution wanted you to believe that complex engineering failures can be reduced to simple villainy, that every corporate decision is either heroic or evil. Vance gestured at the jury. But the real world is complicated. Sometimes good people make difficult choices with incomplete information. Sometimes tragedy happens despite everyone's best efforts. He pointed at Nathan. And sometimes disgruntled employees spend years building conspiracy theories to explain their own failures. The prosecution's case rests on documentation created by a man who was fired for incompetence, maintained by a woman who lost her job after making reckless accusations, and supported by a witness who's trading testimony for immunity. Ask yourselves if that sounds like truth or revenge. David Huang took the stand first. He'd lost weight since the preliminary hearing. His suit hung loose on his frame, but his voice was steady as he walked through the conspiracy again. Email chains, recorded meetings, wire transfers proving bribes. Vance cross-examined for 3 hours, trying to break him, suggesting he was lying to save himself, implying the evidence was fabricated. Huang didn't break. "I'm guilty," he said calmly. "I participated in this conspiracy for 10 years. I signed off on defective designs and denied warranty claims I knew were legitimate. I am absolutely culpable." He looked at the jury. "But so is everyone else at that conference table. And Daniel Mercer orchestrated all of it." The second day, Warren called automotive safety experts who explained in excruciating detail how Nathan's original engineering report had been correct, how the defects were preventable, how every death could have been avoided if Crossline had issued a recall. Vance tried to muddy the technical explanations, suggested the experts were biased, but the science was too clear, the failures too obvious. On the third day, Nathan testified. He walked through his documentation again, explained every repair order, every shipping manifest, every engine that had been sent to his garage to be fixed quietly. The jury looked exhausted by the sheer volume of evidence. Vance came after him hard during cross-examination. "Mr. Keller, you've admitted to having a romantic relationship with Vivian Cross, correct?" "Yes." "A relationship that began during your collaboration on this case?" "It developed during our work together, yes." "How convenient. The disgraced engineer finds an ally in the disgraced CEO. Both of you with axes to grind against Crossline Motors." Vance smiled. "One might wonder if this entire case is just an elaborate revenge fantasy between two bitter ex-employees." Nathan kept his voice level. "My documentation predates meeting Vivian by 9 years. I started building this evidence in 2014. I met her in 2024. Documentation you created alone, with no oversight, no verification. Documentation that has been corroborated by David Huang's evidence, by federal investigators, by independent accident reports. Documentation that conveniently supports the narrative you and Ms. Cross have built together." Vance leaned forward. "Isn't it true that Ms. Cross has been living with you during trial preparation?" "She's been staying in Ashton Ridge, yes." "In your home?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Sometimes." "How many nights?" Warren objected. The judge sustained it. But again, the implication hung in the air. The suggestion that Nathan and Vivian had coordinated their testimony in bed. Vivian testified on day 4. She was composed and precise, walking through her tenure as CEO and what she'd failed to see, admitting her culpability while making clear that the conspiracy itself had been orchestrated before she ever took the position. "I should have questioned the profit margins," she said. "Should have investigated why warranty denials were so high. Should have demanded to see safety reports instead of trusting executives who told me everything was fine." She looked at the jury. "Those failures are mine to carry. But the decision to hide known defects, to bribe inspectors, to silence whistleblowers, that was Daniel Mercer." Vance tried to paint her as a scorned executive seeking revenge for being fired, suggested her relationship with Nathan had clouded her judgment. "Isn't it true, Ms. Cross, that you only became interested in this case after meeting Mr. Keller? That your sudden crisis of conscience coincided remarkably with falling in love?" Vivian didn't flinch. "I became interested in this case when I discovered my company had killed 73 people. My relationship with Nathan Keller is separate from the evidence. The conspiracy exists whether we're together or not." "But it must feel good, doesn't it? Having someone support your narrative after losing your career?" "What feels good," Vivian said coldly, "is finally telling the truth after spending years as the face of a lie. Nathan didn't give me that. I chose it." The prosecution rested on day 6. Mercer's defense was aggressive but thin. Vance called former Crossline executives who testified that safety was always the top priority, that engineering reports were carefully reviewed, that the defects were unforeseeable complications, not negligent design. Warren tore them apart on cross-examination, showed them their own emails discussing cost-benefit analyses of recalls versus settlements, played recordings of meetings where they explicitly discussed hiding defects. One by one, their testimonies collapsed. On day 8, the prosecution called a surprise witness. Robert Patterson wheeled himself to the witness stand, the former Marine who'd been paralyzed in the Chicago highway accident. His testimony was simple and devastating. "I was driving my daughter to gymnastics," he said. His voice was quiet but clear. "The brakes failed. I tried pumping them. Nothing. We hit the barrier at 60 miles per hour. He paused. "I woke up in the hospital unable to feel anything below my neck. My daughter was in the back seat. She watched the whole thing." He looked at Mercer. "The investigators told me it was mechanical failure. Bad luck. But then I saw the news about the recall, about the defective engines, about Daniel Mercer knowing the brakes were faulty and selling the cars anyway." His hands clenched on the wheelchair arms. "My daughter has nightmares about that day. She's 11 years old and she's terrified of cars because she watched her father become paralyzed in front of her, because Daniel Mercer decided my life was worth less than his profit margin." The courtroom was silent, except for someone in the gallery crying softly. Vance had no questions for Patterson. What could he ask? The man's paralysis spoke louder than any testimony. The trial lasted 3 weeks, 27 witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence, testimony that ranged from technical engineering analysis to heartbreaking victim impact statements. Marcus Webb's widow testified about finding out her husband had burned to death because of a fuel line defect Crossline had known about for years. A mother from Portland described losing her entire family in an accident that could have been prevented with a $50 part. By the end, even some of the jurors were crying. Closing arguments happened on a Friday. Warren was passionate and precise. He connected every piece of evidence into a narrative of conspiracy and greed. He showed the jury the photo of the executive board meeting with Nathan's report visible on the table, played the recorded conversations where Mercer discussed bribing safety inspectors. 10 years, Warren said. Daniel Mercer had 10 years to do the right thing, to issue a recall, to fix the defects, to save lives. He gestured at the gallery where victims' families sat. Instead, he chose profit, chose silence, chose to let 73 people die because it was cheaper than admitting his company had made a mistake. Warren's voice dropped. This isn't a complicated case. It's not about engineering nuances or corporate complexities. It's about a man who knew people would die and did nothing to stop it. That's not negligence. That's murder. Vance's closing was elegant but hollow. He tried to create doubt about the conspiracy, suggested the evidence was circumstantial, painted Mercer as a scapegoat for systemic industry problems. The prosecution wants a villain, Vance said, someone to blame for tragic accidents that happen in every industry. But Daniel Mercer is not a villain. He's a man who made difficult decisions in an imperfect world, and now he's being sacrificed because people need someone to punish. Nathan watched the jury's faces. Most of them looked unconvinced. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Nathan spent those days in the garage trying to work and failing. Every car he started repairing sat unfinished while he paced and checked his phone and tried not to imagine Mercer walking free. Vivian was calmer on the surface, but Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she couldn't sit still, the way she kept finding small tasks to fill the silence. Ellie asked every morning if the bad guys were in jail yet. Nathan told her they were still waiting. "Waiting is hard," Ellie said seriously. "Yeah, baby, it really is." On day 2 of deliberations, Margaret called. "Jury's back." Nathan and Vivian drove to the courthouse in silence. The drive felt both infinite and too short. Nathan's hands were shaking. Vivian held one of them the entire way. The courtroom was packed again. Victims' families in their usual seats, media filling every available space. Nathan saw Mrs. Webb, Robert Patterson, dozens of faces he'd memorized from newspaper obituaries over the years. They all looked as terrified as he felt. The jury filed in. Nathan tried to read their expressions and failed. Some looked tired. Some looked grim. None of them would meet Mercer's eyes. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Nathan's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman stood. She was a middle-aged black woman who'd been an elementary school teacher for 20 years. During voir dire, she'd said she believed in accountability. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom exhaled. On the charge of criminal negligence resulting in death? Guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering? Guilty. One by one, the forewoman read through 17 different charges. Guilty on all of them. Nathan heard it but couldn't process it. After 10 years of fighting, after being called a liar and a fraud and a conspiracy theorist, 12 strangers had looked at the evidence and said he'd been right all along. Vivian grabbed his hand so tight it hurt. Her eyes were streaming, but she was smiling. Around them, the courtroom erupted. Victims' families crying and hugging. Reporters rushing for the exits to file stories. The judge banging her gavel for order. Daniel Mercer sat at the defense table, his face completely blank, like he couldn't quite believe what had happened, like he genuinely thought money and lawyers could save him. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks out. Outside the courthouse, Nathan and Vivian were mobbed by reporters. Cameras flashing, questions shouting over each other. Mr. Keller, how does it feel to finally get justice? Ms. Cross, do you think this verdict will change corporate culture? What do you say to critics who claim this was a personal vendetta? Warren appeared and gently shepherded them through the crowd to a waiting car. Once they were inside and moving, Nathan finally let himself breathe. We won, Vivian said, like she was testing the words. Yeah, we did. I can't believe we actually did. Nathan laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. I spent 10 years documenting evidence, and I still didn't think it would work. What happens now? Now we wait for sentencing. Then we figure out how to live in a world where Daniel Mercer is actually facing consequences. They drove back to Ashton Ridge as the sun set. The town looked exactly the same as when they'd left. Nothing had changed, except everything had. Margaret was waiting at the garage with Ellie. The moment Nathan walked in, his daughter launched herself at him. Did you win? Mrs. Patterson's mom texted Margaret and said the jury said guilty. Nathan picked her up. Yeah, baby, we won. Ellie squeezed him tight. I knew you would, because you're a superhero. I'm really not. You are to me. Nathan held his daughter and let himself cry for the first time in 10 years. Not sad crying, not frustrated crying, just release. The weight of a decade finally lifting. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The courtroom was quieter this time. No media frenzy, just victims' families and the people who'd been there from the beginning. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Sandra Martinez. She'd been stern throughout the trial, but fair. Now she looked at Daniel Mercer with something that might have been discussed. Mr. Mercer, you've been found guilty of 17 counts related to corporate fraud, criminal negligence, and conspiracy. Before I pass sentence, I want to make something clear. She gestured at the gallery. These people trusted your company. They bought vehicles believing Crossline Motors valued their safety, and you betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. You knew people would die. You had reports, data, and warnings from your own engineers, and you chose profit. Mercer stood there expressionless while the judge spoke. 73 people died because of your decisions. Hundreds more were injured. Thousands of families had their lives destroyed. And you did it knowingly, deliberately, with full awareness of the consequences. Judge Martinez opened a folder. I've read impact statements from victims' families, a widow who lost her husband, children who lost parents, a former Marine who will never walk again. Her voice hardened. Your actions didn't just break laws, they broke lives. She looked at Mercer directly. I'm sentencing you to 30 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for 20 years. Additionally, you're ordered to pay $78 million in restitution to victims' families, the exact amount you and your fellow executives profited from this conspiracy. The courtroom was silent. 30 years. Mercer was 67 years old. He'd die in prison. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, I'm recommending that federal investigators pursue charges against the remaining Crossline executives involved in this conspiracy. And I'm ordering a complete review of automotive safety oversight to prevent this from happening again. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. Mercer was led away in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like removing the expensive suits and corporate power had revealed how ordinary he actually was. Nathan watched him go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just exhaustion. Outside, victims' families thanked him, shook his hand, hugged him. Mrs. Webb cried on his shoulder and told him her husband would have been grateful someone had fought for him. Robert Patterson wheeled up and extended his hand. "Thank you for not forgetting us." "I couldn't have even if I tried," Nathan said honestly. Warren found them before they left. The DOJ is moving forward with charges against the other executives. Huang's testimony and your documentation are being used to build cases against all of them. "How many?" Vivian asked. 14. Everyone who attended that conference room meeting, everyone who signed off on hiding the defects. Warren smiled tiredly. "You didn't just take down Mercer, you dismantled the entire conspiracy." "What about Crossline Motors itself?" "The company's filing for bankruptcy. Too many lawsuits, too much liability. It'll probably be acquired by a competitor and restructured." Warren looked at Vivian. "I know that's hard. Employees will lose jobs." "I know." Vivian's voice was quiet. "But it's the right outcome. The company was built on blood. It needs to die." They drove back to Ashton Ridge one final time. The trial was over. The verdict was in. Justice had been served as much as justice ever was in a world where the dead stayed dead. Margaret and Ellie were waiting with a cake that said, "Congratulations, superheroes," in messy frosting. The town had apparently thrown together an impromptu celebration. Half of Ashton Ridge was crowded into Nathan's garage with casseroles and cheap champagne and genuine happiness. Mrs. Chen hugged him. Mr. Peterson shook his hand. Tommy's mom apologized again for ever doubting him. People Nathan barely knew told him they were proud. It was overwhelming and perfect, and Nathan wanted to hide in his office until everyone left. But Ellie was so happy, dragging him around to show everyone her superhero dad, that Nathan stayed and smiled and pretended he was okay with being the center of attention. Later, after everyone had left and Ellie was asleep, Nathan and Vivian sat on the garage roof again. Their spot. Their quiet place away from verdicts and victims and the weight of 10 years. "What happens now?" Vivian asked. It was the same question she'd asked after the verdict, but this time it felt different, like she was really asking about them. "I don't know," Nathan admitted. "I've spent 10 years fighting this. I don't know who I am without it. You're a father, a mechanic, a good person who fought for what was right. I'm a guy with a failing garage and a daughter who deserves better than mac and cheese 4 nights a week." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "There's a settlement fund. Victims' families will get restitution. But there's also compensation for whistleblowers. You documented this entire conspiracy. You're entitled to a significant portion." "I don't want their money." "It's not their money anymore. It's yours. Money you earned by spending 10 years refusing to be silent." She turned to look at him. "You could fix up the garage. Expand the business. Send Ellie to whatever college she wants. Actually live instead of just surviving." Nathan thought about it. About 10 years of barely making rent. About borrowing suits for court. About his daughter wearing hand-me-downs and acting like it didn't matter. "How much are we talking about?" "Probably close to 2 million. Nathan laughed. "That's insane." "That's justice. Finally paying you back for what they took." "They took 10 years. No amount of money returns that." "No. But it might make the next 10 years easier." Nathan pulled Vivian closer. "And what about you? What happens to the disgraced CEO who blew up her own company? I've had offers, corporate consulting, speaking engagements. Apparently I'm very marketable as a redemption story." She smiled wryly. "But I'm not interested in going back to that world." "So what are you interested in?" Vivian looked at him for a long moment. "There's a garage in Ohio that could probably use better management. Maybe expand into teaching auto mechanics to kids who can't afford trade school. Maybe become something more than just a repair shop." Nathan's heart did something complicated. "You want to stay in Ashton Ridge?" "I want to stay with you. If Ashton Ridge is where you are, then yeah." "It's a dying town. There's nothing here. There's you. There's Ellie. There's a community that came together to support you when it mattered." Vivian gestured at the town spread out below them. "That's more than I ever had in Chicago." Nathan kissed her. slow and deliberate under stars that had witnessed 10 years of fighting. "Okay," he said. "We build something here. Together." "Together," Vivian agreed. 3 months later, Nathan stood in front of his garage watching workers install a new sign. Keller Automotive and Technical Training Center in fresh paint that gleamed in summer sunlight. The garage had been completely renovated. New equipment, expanded workspace, a classroom in back where Vivian was setting up computers for the first cohort of students, local kids who couldn't afford 4-year degrees but wanted to learn a trade. Ellie was helping by getting in everyone's way and asking 1,000 questions. She'd started second grade 2 weeks ago and told anyone who would listen that her dad was famous and her not-quite stepmom but kind of was teaching people how to fix cars. Margaret handled the bookkeeping from a real office instead of a corner desk. They'd hired 2 full-time mechanics. Business was actually steady for the first time in years. Nathan walked through the transformed space feeling like he was living someone else's life. The settlement money had made all of it possible. $2 million that had let him fix the garage, expand the business, set up a college fund for Ellie, and still have enough left over to finally breathe. But more than the money, the verdict had changed things. People in Ashton Ridge looked at him differently now, with respect instead of pity. Like he was someone who'd fought impossible odds and won. Nathan wasn't sure how he felt about that. He was still the same person, still made mistakes, still had days where he could barely get out of bed because the weight of 10 years hit him all at once. But he had Vivian now, who understood the weight because she carried her own version of it, who woke up some mornings crying because she'd been the face of a company that killed people, who was trying every day to become someone better than who she'd been. They were healing together, slowly, imperfectly, but healing. The doorbell above the garage entrance chimed. Nathan looked up to see a woman in her 30s standing in the doorway. She looked nervous. "Can I help you?" Nathan asked. "Are you Nathan Keller?" "Yeah." She took a breath. "My brother died in 2017. Engine fire in his Crossline sedan. I saw your name in the trial coverage. You documented his case." Nathan went still. "What was his name?" "James Chen. He was 28, worked as a teacher." Nathan remembered. Engine serial number CX7-338291. Fuel line rupture. The car had burned on I-75 outside Detroit. James Chen had been trapped inside. "I'm sorry," Nathan said quietly. "I documented his accident, tried to—" "I know. I read the trial transcripts." The woman's eyes were bright with tears. "I just wanted to say thank you. For 10 years, everyone told me it was an accident, that James just had bad luck. But you proved it wasn't. You proved someone was responsible. I'm sorry I couldn't save him." "You couldn't. But you remembered him." She wiped her eyes. "That matters more than you know." She left after that, and Nathan stood in his renovated garage trying not to fall apart. Vivian found him 20 minutes later still standing there. "You okay?" "James Chen's sister just came by to thank me for documenting her brother's death." Vivian put her arms around him. "That's the 4th one this month." "I know." Families kept showing up. People who'd lost someone in a Crossline accident, who'd spent years being told it was driver error or bad luck or unavoidable tragedy, who'd finally gotten answers because Nathan had refused to forget. It should have felt good, validating. Instead, it just hurt, because every grateful family was a reminder of someone Nathan had failed to save. "You can't carry all of them," Vivian said gently. "You did everything you could, more than anyone else would have. It wasn't enough. It was enough to get justice, to make sure Mercer and the others are paying for what they did." She pulled back to look at him. "You can't resurrect the dead, Nathan. You can only make sure they're not forgotten, and you did that." Nathan knew she was right, but grief didn't care about logic. That night, he sat down with Ellie before bed. "Can I ask you something, baby?" "Sure." "Do you understand what Dad was doing with the trial and everything?" Ellie thought about it seriously. "You were fighting bad guys who hurt people." "Yeah, but the people they hurt, I couldn't save them. They're still gone." "But you made sure the bad guys got in trouble, right?" "Right." "Then you did save people. Just not the way superheroes do in movies." Ellie looked at him with wisdom that seemed impossible from a 7-year-old. "In movies, superheroes stop the bad thing from happening, But real superheroes make sure bad people don't get away with it. Nathan pulled her into a hug. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't listen when I explain how blue raspberry is scientifically the best flavor. Nathan laughed and tucked her in, listening to her chatter about school and friends and whether Vivian would come to her next soccer game. Downstairs, Vivian was grading applications for the training program. She'd been working 12-hour days getting it set up, interviewing students, designing curriculum, pouring herself into creating something that actually helped people instead of just maximizing profit. Nathan sat beside her and looked at the application she was reviewing. A 17-year-old kid from the next town over whose father had lost his job when the local factory closed. Are you going to accept him? Nathan asked. He's got good grades, strong work ethic, can't afford traditional college. Vivian marked the application approved. Yeah, I think he deserves a chance. You're good at this. At what? Seeing potential in people everyone else overlooks. Vivian smiled. I learned from the best. You saw something in me when I showed up at your garage. Could have sent me away, told me to solve my own problems. You were persistent. I was desperate. There's a difference. She set down her pen. You gave me a chance to be better than I was. Now I'm trying to do the same for these kids. They worked in comfortable silence. Nathan organizing repair orders, Vivian reviewing applications, building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. A year after the trial, Nathan received a letter from the federal prosecutor's office. The remaining 14 Crossline executives had all been convicted. Sentences ranging from 8 to 25 years, hundreds of millions in restitution ordered. The automotive industry had implemented new safety oversight regulations, mandatory third-party testing, whistleblower protections, congressional hearings on corporate accountability. Nathan's documentation had become the foundation for industry reform. You changed things, Vivian said, reading the letter over his shoulder. Actually changed how the entire automotive industry operates. I just wrote down what I saw. You documented a decade of corporate murder and refused to be silenced. That's more than writing things down. Nathan folded the letter carefully. It still doesn't bring them back. No, but it might save the next 73 people. And the 73 after that. Vivian kissed his cheek. That's not nothing. She was right, even if Nathan's heart didn't fully believe it yet. The training program graduated its first class that spring. 15 students who'd learned automotive repair, business management, and how to run an ethical operation. 10 of them already had job offers. 3 were starting their own shops. Nathan stood at the ceremony watching them accept certificates and thought about all the ways life had changed in 2 years. From fighting alone in a garage to building something that helped people build futures. Ellie sat in the front row wearing a dress she'd insisted on buying herself with allowance money. She clapped louder than anyone when Nathan gave a short speech about integrity and refusing to compromise on what mattered. Afterward, one of the graduates approached him. A 19-year-old named Marcus, whose mother had died in a crossline accident when he was 12. I wanted to thank you, Marcus said, for documenting my mom's case, for making sure someone paid for what happened to her. Nathan had heard variations of this speech dozens of times now. It never got easier. I'm sorry I couldn't save her. You gave me justice. That's something. Marcus smiled slightly. And you gave me this. A skill. A career. A way to move forward that isn't just anger and grief. He shook Nathan's hand and walked away, and Nathan realized maybe that was enough. Maybe he couldn't resurrect the dead or undo the past, but he could build a future where their deaths actually meant something. That night, Nathan proposed to Vivian on the garage roof under the same stars where they'd spent 2 years healing together. I don't have a ring, he admitted, and I'm definitely not good at romantic speeches. Then why are you asking? Because I love you. Because you saw me at my worst and decided to fight beside me anyway. Because I want to build a life with you that isn't defined by the trial or the past or anything except choosing each other. Vivian was crying. That was actually a pretty good speech. So is that a yes? That's absolutely a yes. They got married 3 months later in a small ceremony in Ashton Ridge. Ellie was the flower girl and took her job very seriously. Margaret officiated. Half the town showed up. It was simple and imperfect and exactly what they both wanted. During the vows, Nathan promised to be honest even when it was hard. To fight for what was right even when it cost everything. To remember that integrity mattered more than comfort. Vivian promised to never stop questioning, to value people over profit, to build things that helped instead of harmed. They both promised to keep healing together. The reception was in the garage, which had become the center of everything they were building. Students, community programs, a place where people came to learn skills and find second chances. Nathan stood watching Ellie dance with Tommy, and Vivian talk to students, and Margaret lecture someone about proper accounting procedures. His entire world contained in a renovated garage in a dying Ohio town. It wasn't the life he'd imagined 10 years ago when he'd started documenting defective engines, but it was the life he'd earned by refusing to forget people everyone else wanted buried. Later, after everyone had left and Ellie was asleep upstairs, Nathan and Vivian sat in the quiet garage surrounded by evidence of a decade of fighting. "Do you ever regret it?" Vivian asked. "Spending 10 years on this instead of just moving on?" Nathan thought about Marcus Webb, Robert Patterson, 73 names he'd memorized, 73 families who'd thanked him for not forgetting. "No," he said honestly. "It nearly destroyed me, cost me everything multiple times. But if I hadn't fought, Mercer would still be free. The conspiracy would still be hidden, and the next 73 people would be dying right now. So it was worth it? I don't know if worth is the right word. It was necessary. Someone had to do it, and I was the one standing there with the ability to document the truth." He pulled Vivian closer. "I just wish I hadn't had to do it alone for so long." "You're not alone anymore." "No, I'm really not." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been broken by the same fight and healed by choosing each other. Outside, Ashton Ridge slept, a dying town that was slowly coming back to life because a mechanic had refused to stay quiet and a CEO had chosen truth over comfort. Nathan thought about the 17-year-old kid whose application Vivian had approved, about the training program graduates starting their own shops, about students learning that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the profitable thing, about all the ways one person documenting the truth could ripple outward into change. He'd spent 10 years carrying the weight of 73 deaths, 10 years believing he'd failed because he couldn't save them. But maybe success wasn't saving everyone. Maybe it was fighting anyway, documenting anyway, refusing to forget anyway. Maybe it was teaching the next generation that integrity wasn't weakness, that standing alone was better than compromising with evil, that truth eventually mattered even when it took a decade to prove it. Nathan didn't know if that made him a hero. He still felt like the same broken mechanic who'd started documenting defective engines in a garage nobody cared about. But he'd changed things, actually changed them, and maybe that was enough.